They told me the child was a monster, a cursed thing born under a blood moon, with eyes that glowed like embers and a scream that could shatter glass. They said he killed his own mother during birth, tearing through her from the inside with claws no newborn should possess. The Alpha King, Theron of the Shadowpine Pack, had locked the boy away in the lowest dungeon of his fortress, chained with silver and forgotten. They said the king couldn't bear to look at the son who had stolen his beloved mate. They said the child howled through the nights, a sound that made even the bravest warriors cover their ears and pray to the moon goddess for protection. They said his eyes burned with an unnatural fire, that his tiny hands had already sprouted claws, that his wolf was so strong it had emerged at birth, something that should have been impossible. They said he was an abomination, a mistake of nature, a curse upon the Shadowpine Pack. But I knew the truth. I had been there the night of the birth, a lowly Omega servant in the royal household, invisible as always. My hands had carried fresh linens, my eyes had stayed downcast, my presence so insignificant that the powerful wolves in that room never thought to guard their words around me. I had seen the Queen, Lyanna, laboring through the night, her screams echoing through the stone halls of the fortress. I had seen her golden hair dark with sweat, her face pale as moonlight, her hands gripping the sheets until her knuckles turned white. I had seen the midwife, a woman whose scent had been wrong, laced with something bitter and chemical beneath the herbs and oils. I had watched that midwife add something to the queen's water, something that made the liquid shimmer with an oily rainbow sheen. And I had seen Queen Lyanna's eyes go wide with shock and betrayal in her final moments, her hand reaching out not toward her newborn son, but toward the door, as if trying to warn someone, to tell someone what had been done to her. The baby had been born healthy. Small, yes, and his wolf was present in a way that was unusual, but not unheard of among powerful alpha bloodlines. His eyes had been gold, bright as captured sunlight, and he had cried with the strong, lusty wail of a healthy infant. But then the midwife had wrapped him roughly, her hands cruel, and I had seen her press something sharp against his tiny arm, drawing blood. The baby's cries had turned to shrieks of pain and rage, and his wolf, that infant wolf barely awakened to the world, had surged forward in instinctive self-defense. The claws that emerged were no larger than rose thorns, the teeth like tiny pearls, but the damage to perception had been done. The witnesses, the advisors, and healers who had been summoned to attend the royal birth had gasped in horror. A newborn shifting, a newborn defending itself with violence. They had called it monstrous, even as the queen died, even as her last breath left her body and her eyes went glassy and empty. I had wanted to scream the truth. I had wanted to tell them about the poison, about the midwife's treachery, about the deliberate provocation of the infant's wolf. But I was an Omega, the lowest of the low. My word meant nothing against the testimony of the king's own advisors, against the authority of the royal midwife who had served the pack for decades. So I had stayed silent, my heart breaking, my hands trembling as I cleaned up the blood and the birthing fluids, as I watched them take the screaming baby away. I had stayed silent when they told the grieving king that his son was dangerous, that the child had caused his beloved mate's death, that the boy needed to be contained until they could determine what to do with him. I had stayed silent for 3 days while the fortress mourned their queen and whispered about the cursed prince. But on the 4th day, I had heard Chancellor Mordain speaking in the corridor outside the kitchen where I was scrubbing pots. His voice had been low, meant only for the captain of the guard, but my Omega hearing had always been sharp, a survival mechanism developed over years of needing to know when danger was approaching. "The boy is a liability," Mordain had said, his cultured voice cold and clinical. "The king is too deep in his grief to think clearly. He won't make the necessary decision, so we must make it for him. When enough time has passed, when the king's mourning has dulled his senses further, we'll tell him the child died of fever, a tragic loss, but a mercy for everyone." The captain had hesitated, and I had heard the doubt in his voice when he asked, "And if the king demands to see the body?" Mordain's reply had been swift and cruel. "There are ways to make a body unrecognizable, a fire, an accident. The king need never know the truth. We're doing him a kindness, really, saving him from the daily reminder of what he lost." That was the moment I decided. I couldn't let them kill an innocent child. I couldn't stand by and let them murder a baby because he was inconvenient, because he reminded them of their own failures to protect their queen. I was nobody. I was nothing. I had no power, no status, no voice, but I had 2 hands and a desperate, fierce determination that surprised even me. I would save the Alpha King's son, even if it cost me everything. Even if it meant I could never come back, even if it meant spending the rest of my life running and hiding and looking over my shoulder. Some things were worth the sacrifice. Some lives were worth saving. And this baby, this tiny, terrified, innocent baby who had done nothing wrong except be born at the wrong time to the wrong circumstances, he deserved a chance to live. I spent 2 weeks preparing. I stole supplies in small increments, things that wouldn't be missed immediately. A thick traveling cloak from the laundry, dried meat and hardtack from the kitchens, just a little at a time. A waterskin, a flint and steel, a small knife meant for cutting vegetables. Strips of cloth that could serve as bandages or bindings. I took a detailed map from the fortress library, one that showed not just the Shadowpine territories, but the great wilderness beyond, the Thornwood, a forest so vast and untamed that even the bravest hunters feared to enter its depths. Stories said the Thornwood was cursed, that wolves who entered never returned, that ancient magic twisted the paths and led travelers in circles until they died of starvation. But I also knew that stories were often exaggerated, that fear was a tool used to keep people in line, and I knew that if the forest was as dangerous as they claimed, it was the one place Theron's warriors wouldn't follow. I also spent those 2 weeks learning the patterns of the guards. The dungeon was heavily secured, but even the most disciplined soldiers grew complacent with routine. I learned which guard liked to drink too much wine on his rounds, which one would sometimes doze at his post during the quiet hours before dawn, which doors were checked most frequently, and which were assumed to be secure simply because they always had been. I learned that the head jailer kept all the dungeon keys on a single iron ring that he wore on his belt, and that he hung that belt on a hook by the door when he used the privy. It took me 3 tries, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would break through my ribs. But on the 4th night, I managed to slip into the jailer's small office while he was relieving himself and make a quick wax impression of the 3 keys I would need. Finding a blacksmith willing to cast copies without asking questions had been harder, but I'd finally found an old wolf on the edge of the Packlands who did work for coin and didn't care about the reasons. The night I took Ash, that's the name I gave him later, the name that meant hope and new beginnings rising from the ruins of what had been, the fortress was ablaze with winter solstice celebrations. The great hall thundered with drums and howling, the pack lost in their revelry, celebrating the longest night of the year and the promise that the sun would return. Wine and mead flowed freely, meat roasted on spits in the courtyard, and the wolves danced and sang and fought in the good-natured way of a pack at peace. It was the perfect cover. No one would notice a small omega slipping through the servants' passages, moving like a shadow through the places where the invisible people worked. No one would think twice about seeing me carrying a basket of linens toward the lower levels. Servants were always moving, always working, always present but never truly seen. The dungeon was a place of nightmares, all dripping stone and the stench of fear and old blood and human waste. The air was thick and cold, so cold I could see my breath puffing out in small clouds. Torches flickered in iron sconces, casting dancing shadows that looked like grasping hands and twisted faces. The stones beneath my feet were slick with moisture, and something darker that I didn't want to identify. I could hear sounds echoing through the corridors, the drip of water, the scurry of rats, the occasional moan or whimper from prisoners locked away in the darkness. My hands shook as I worked the locks, the stolen keys feeling impossibly heavy and loud as they scraped against the iron mechanisms. Every sound seemed amplified, every footstep echoing like thunder. I was certain someone would hear me, would catch me, would drag me before the king and execute me for treason. The first lock clicked open, then the second. The third was the hardest, the key sticking in the mechanism, and I had to bite my lip to keep from crying out in frustration and fear. Finally, it turned. The final door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo through my very bones, a sound like the earth itself protesting what had been done in this place. The smell that hit me was overwhelming, the reek of waste and unwashed body and silver-burning flesh. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat, but I forced it down and stepped inside. Inside, huddled in the corner on a pile of filthy straw that was more mold than bedding, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 3 months old, but he was already the size of a 1-year-old child, his wolf's accelerated growth evident even in his malnourished state. His hair was black as a raven's wing, long and matted with filth, hanging in tangled clumps around his too thin face. His skin was pale from lack of sunlight, almost translucent, stretched over bones that were too prominent. I could count his ribs. His arms and legs were stick-thin, wasted from lack of movement and proper food. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart, that made me forget how to breathe for a long, terrible moment. They were gold, bright and burning like captured sunlight, like honey held up to a flame, like the heart of a fire. And they were filled with an intelligence and sorrow no infant should possess. This child had suffered. This child had known pain and loneliness and abandonment in the first months of his life when he should have known only warmth and love and safety. This child had been betrayed by the world before he even had a chance to understand what the world was. Silver chains, thin but cruelly tight, bound his tiny wrists and ankles. The metal had burned into his skin, leaving angry red welts that wept clear fluid, the flesh around them blistered and raw. Silver was poison to wolves, burning and weakening us, and to use it on a child, on an infant, was a cruelty beyond comprehension. He was wearing a rag that might once have been a shirt, filthy and torn, barely covering his small body. There was a bucket in the corner that served as his toilet, and from the smell, it hadn't been emptied in days. He didn't cry when he saw me. He just watched me with those ancient, knowing eyes, his small body tensing as if preparing for another hurt, another betrayal. "Hello, little one," whispered, my voice cracking with emotion, with rage at what had been done to him, with sorrow for his suffering. I knelt slowly, making myself small and non-threatening, keeping my movements careful and deliberate. "My name is Kira. I'm going to take you away from here. I'm going to take you somewhere safe. I promise." He tilted his head, studying me with that unnerving intensity. His nostrils flared as he scented me, trying to determine if I was a threat, if I was another person who would hurt him. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a rasp, rough from screaming himself hoarse in this dark place, he spoke. A 3-month-old child spoke, and the impossibility of it, the proof of how powerful his wolf was, how special he was, made me want to weep. "Hurt," he said, lifting his chained hands toward me, his gold eyes filling with tears that he refused to let fall. "It hurts." My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. "I know, sweetheart," I whispered, tears streaming down my own face now. "I know it hurts. I'm going to fix it. I'm going to make it better, I promise you. No more hurt. No more dark. No more being alone." I pulled out the vial I'd prepared, a mixture of rendered animal fat and crushed herbs that my mother had taught me about when I was young, before she died, before I'd been absorbed into the pack's servant class and forgotten. It was a folk remedy for silver burns, something the old wolves used before modern medicine. I'd hoped I wouldn't need it, but I'd prepared it anyway, and now I was grateful for my paranoid thoroughness. I worked quickly, my hands trembling, coating the chains with the thick paste so I could slip them off without touching the silver directly with my bare hands. Even through the protective layer, I could feel the unnatural heat of the metal, the way it seemed to drink in warmth and twist it into pain. The moment the chains fell away, leaving red, raw circles on his tiny wrists and ankles, he lunged at me. My body tensed, instinct screaming at me to defend myself, to protect my throat, to shift and fight. But he didn't bite or claw or attack. He buried his face in the curve of my neck and clung to me with desperate, trembling strength, his small fingers digging into my shoulders, his entire body shaking with silent sobs. He made no sound, but I could feel the wetness of his tears soaking into my skin, could feel the way his small chest hitched with suppressed crying. He had learned, even in his short, terrible life, that crying brought no comfort, that making noise only brought more pain. So he cried silently, the way an animal cries when it knows predators are listening. I held him, this tiny, broken child, and I made him a silent vow. I would protect him. I would love him. I would give him the life he deserved, even if it meant sacrificing my own, even if it meant I could never have a normal life, never have a mate or a pack or a home of my own. He was mine now, and I was his, and nothing would ever change that. We fled into the night, moving through the servant passages I knew so well, avoiding the main corridors where guards might be patrolling. The baby, I couldn't think of him as anything else yet, clung to me like a small monkey, his arms around my neck, his legs wrapped around my waist, his face still buried against my shoulder. He weighed almost nothing, far less than a child his size should weigh, and the evidence of his starvation made rage burn hot and fierce in my chest. I had prepared a small pack, everything I'd stolen over the past 2 weeks carefully arranged for maximum efficiency. Dried meat wrapped in cloth, hardtack that would last for months, a water skin filled with clean water from the fortress well, a thick wool cloak that could serve as a blanket, spare clothes in sizes I'd guessed for the child, flint and steel wrapped carefully to keep them dry, the knife, the map, strips of cloth for bandages, a small pot for cooking, a coil of rope that might prove useful. It wasn't much, but it was everything I could carry. Everything I could manage without drawing attention to myself. We traveled for 3 days, moving only at night, hiding during the day in whatever shelter I could find. A hollow beneath the roots of a massive oak, a small cave barely large enough for the 2 of us to squeeze into, a dense thicket of brambles that tore at my clothes and skin but concealed us completely. The child, I started thinking of him as little one in my mind, never cried, Not once. He was preternaturally silent, watching the world with those eerie golden eyes that seemed to see and understand far too much. He would drink water when I offered it, would eat small pieces of the dried meat. I softened in my mouth first like a mother bird feeding her chick, but he never asked for anything, never demanded, never complained. The silver burns on his wrists and ankles were healing. I kept them clean and coated with the herbal paste, but I could see the scars they would leave, permanent reminders of what had been done to him. On the fourth day, exhausted and desperate, we finally crossed into the thornwood. The change was immediate and palpable, like stepping through an invisible wall into another world. The trees grew so close together their branches wove overhead, blocking out the sky almost completely, creating a permanent twilight even in the middle of the day. The trunks were massive, ancient beyond reckoning, their bark rough and dark and covered with strange symbols that might have been natural growth patterns, or might have been something else, something older and more purposeful. The undergrowth was thick with thorns, great sprawling bushes covered with spikes as long as my finger, their branches reaching out like grasping hands to catch at clothes and skin. Strange sounds echoed in the darkness, sounds that didn't quite match any animal I knew. The cry of birds that seemed to have too many notes. Voices that might have been wind through leaves or might have been whispers in languages I'd never heard. The air smelled different here, rich and loamy, thick with decomposition and growth happening simultaneously, the scent of a forest that had been growing and dying and growing again for thousands of years. But we were safe. The shadow pine wolves would not follow us here. Even the king's best trackers, wolves who could follow a scent across running water and rocky ground, who could track prey through rain and snow and wind, would not enter the thornwood. The old magic here was too strong, the danger too real, the stories too frightening. I pushed deeper into the forest, following animal trails when I could find them, pushing through the undergrowth when I couldn't. Thorns tore at my cloak and dress, left long scratches on my arms and face. My feet ached in my worn boots, blisters forming and breaking and forming again. I was hungry, the dried meat and hardtack lasting longer than I'd hoped, but still disappearing faster than I liked. But I kept moving, driven by the fear that somehow, impossibly, they might follow, might find us, might take him back to that dark cell. After 2 more days of wandering, weak and exhausted and starting to despair, I found it. A waterfall, not massive but substantial, pouring down a rocky cliff face into a clear pool below. And behind the waterfall, hidden by the curtain of falling water and accessible only by climbing across slippery rocks, was a cave. It was perfect. The entrance was obscured by the waterfall and by thick vines that hung down from the cliff above, creating a natural camouflage. Inside, the cave was surprisingly spacious, maybe 15 feet deep and 10 feet wide, with a ceiling high enough that I could stand upright. The floor was sandy and dry, sloping gently upward from the entrance. And at the very back, miracle of miracles, a natural hot spring bubbled up from the earth, filling a small pool before draining away through cracks in the rock. The water was hot enough to steam, turning the back of the cave into a warm, humid sanctuary. "This," I declared to the little one, who was still clinging to me, his small face peering around at our new home with wide golden eyes, "is where we'll stay. This is our home now. We're safe here." I set him down gently, and he immediately toddled to the hot spring, his wolf's instincts drawn to the warmth. He dipped his small hand in the water, then looked back at me with something like wonder in his eyes. "Warm," he said, his rough little voice holding a note of amazement, as if he'd forgotten that warmth existed. "Yes, baby," I said, kneeling beside him, my own eyes stinging with tears at his simple joy over something so basic. "It's warm. And it's ours. Nobody can hurt you here. I promise." He looked at me for a long moment, those ancient gold eyes searching my face. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he leaned against me, his small body finally starting to relax, the constant tension beginning to ease. "Safe?" he asked, his voice so small, so hopeful, so heartbreakingly vulnerable. "Safe," I confirmed, wrapping my arms around him. "Safe and loved and home." The first year in the Thornwood was the hardest year of my life, harder than the years I'd spent as an invisible servant, harder than the beatings I'd endured when I was too slow or too clumsy, harder than anything I'd ever experienced. I had to learn everything from scratch because the skills I had, cleaning and cooking with provided ingredients and keeping my head down, were useless here. I had to learn to hunt, to track, to kill. I had to learn which plants were edible and which were poisonous, which mushrooms would nourish and which would kill. I had to learn to fish with my bare hands and later with a makeshift spear I carved from a straight branch. I had to learn to trap small animals, rabbits and squirrels and birds, to skin them and gut them and preserve their meat. I had to learn to tan hides, a process that was disgusting and difficult and absolutely necessary if we were going to have warm clothes and blankets. I made mistakes, so many mistakes that I'm still amazed we survived. In the first month, I ate a mushroom that looked like one I thought was edible, but was actually its poisonous cousin. I spent 2 days violently ill, vomiting and experiencing hallucinations, unable to care for the child who watched me with terrified golden eyes and brought me water in his small cupped hands. I lost 3 carefully constructed snares to a fox who was far cleverer than I'd given her credit for, and I swear the animal was laughing at me, sitting just at the edge of the clearing and watching as I reset the traps again and again. I nearly froze to death the first winter because I didn't understand how to properly insulate our cave, didn't know that I needed to create a barrier at the entrance to keep the cold air out and the warm air in, didn't know how to build a fire that would burn through the night without requiring constant tending. But I learned. By the moon goddess, I learned. I learned by trial and error, by observation, by sheer stubborn determination. I watched the animals and learned from them. I watched how the squirrels stored nuts, how the bears prepared for winter, how the wolves hunted in packs. I experimented with different plants, testing them on myself first in tiny amounts before giving them to the child. I taught myself to weave baskets from willow branches, to make pottery from clay I found by the stream, to carve wooden tools and bowls and spoons. I became a creature of the forest, my soft servant's hands growing calloused and strong, my body becoming lean and muscular, my senses sharpening until I could hear a rabbit moving through the underbrush 50 feet away, could smell rain coming hours before it arrived. And through it all, the little one was my constant companion, my reason for continuing when I wanted to give up. He grew quickly, his wolf's nature accelerating his development in a way that was both miraculous and slightly unsettling. By his first birthday, he looked like a 3-year-old child, with long, skinny legs and arms that seemed too long for his body, giving him a coltish, awkward grace. He learned to walk, then to run, moving through the forest with a speed and agility that took my breath away. His wolf was always close to the surface, his eyes flickering between gold and a more human hazel, his senses preternaturally sharp. He could hear things I couldn't, see things in the darkness that were invisible to me, smell the difference between a rabbit and a hare from 100 yards away. He still didn't speak much, his early trauma leaving him selectively mute, more comfortable with silence than with words. But he communicated with me in other ways. A tug on my sleeve meant he was hungry. A specific look, head tilted just so, eyes wide, meant he wanted a story. A small, rumbling growl that vibrated in his chest meant he was happy, content, safe. A high-pitched whine meant he was scared or hurt. We developed our own language, a vocabulary of gestures and sounds and meaningful looks that was ours alone, as intimate and complex as any spoken tongue. I could read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the angle of his head, the way his fingers would curl or flex. He could read mine in the tone of my voice, the way I moved, the expression in my eyes. I taught him everything I could manage to teach. I taught him to read, using the precious book of fairy tales I'd brought with me, one of the few luxuries I'd allowed myself to pack. We would sit by the fire, him curled in my lap, and I would point to the words and sound them out, watching his quick mind absorb the information like a sponge soaking up water. Within 6 months, he was reading simple passages himself, his small finger tracing beneath the words, his lips moving silently as he worked through the sounds. I taught him about the moon goddess, about the cycles of the moon and how they affected our wolves, about the history of the packs and the great wars that had shaped the territories. I taught him about honor and courage, about kindness and compassion, about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. Most importantly, I taught him that his wolf was not a monster, but a gift. We would practice together, safe in our hidden cave or in the deep forest where no one could see us. I would shift into my wolf form, small and red-brown with white markings, the wolf of an omega built for speed and stealth rather than strength and intimidation. And slowly, carefully, I would coax his wolf forward. The first time he fully shifted, he was 2 years old in human reckoning, but looked and acted like a 5-year-old. His wolf was magnificent, larger than mine even at his young age, with midnight black fur and those same burning gold eyes. He had white markings on his chest and paws, like he'd stepped in snow, and his tail was long and plumed. He was beautiful and powerful and perfect, and I told him so, over and over, until he started to believe it. We would run together through the forest, my small red wolf and his larger black one, playing and hunting and simply existing in the joy of our wolves' forms. And slowly, over months and years, I watched him heal. The terrible silence gave way to occasional words, then to questions, then to actual conversations. The constant tension in his small body eased, replaced by the normal energy of a young child. The haunted look in his eyes faded, replaced by curiosity and wonder, and eventually, happiness. He started to smile, then to laugh, a sound so beautiful it made my heart ache with joy. He started to play, making up games and telling himself stories, creating elaborate fantasies with sticks and stones as his toys. He started to be a child, something he'd never had the chance to be in those first terrible months of his life. One night when he was 2 years old but looking like a sturdy 5-year-old, we sat by our fire in the cave. I'd transformed our simple shelter into a real home over the months and years. The floor was covered with woven grass mats and furs I'd tanned myself. Shelves carved from fallen logs held our wooden bowls and cups, our clay pots, our carefully dried herbs and stored nuts and preserved meat. The walls were decorated with his drawings, crude but charming depictions of wolves and trees and the two of us, scratched into pieces of bark with charcoal and bits of colored clay. A drying rack near the entrance held fish and strips of meat, preserving them for later. Our clothes, such as they were, hung on pegs I'd carved and driven into cracks in the stone. It wasn't much, but it was ours, and it was home in a way the fortress had never been. The little one was nestled against my side, his small body warm and solid and precious. We'd spent the day fishing, and he'd caught his first fish all by himself, a moment of such triumph that he'd run around the clearing howling with joy for a full 5 minutes. Now he was tired, content, his eyes starting to droop as the firelight danced across his face. "Mama," he said suddenly, the word hanging in the air between us, precious and fragile and infinitely powerful. It was the first time he'd called me that. The first time he'd given voice to what had been growing between us, the bond that went deeper than blood, that transcended biology. I looked down at him, tears welling in my eyes, my throat tight with emotion. "Yes, baby," I managed to say, my voice cracking. "Am I bad?" His voice was so small, so filled with the weight of a question he'd been carrying for far too long, a poison that had been leaking into his soul. The question that had been whispered to him in the darkness, implied in every cruel action, embedded in his earliest memories. I pulled him into my lap, holding him tight, trying to pour all my love and certainty into my embrace. "No, Ash." I'd started calling him that, and the name had stuck, had become his true name, the name of who he really was rather than who the world had tried to make him. "You are not bad. You are good and brave and strong. You are kind and smart and funny. You are everything a child should be. You are perfect, exactly as you are. And you are loved. So loved. More loved than you can possibly imagine." He looked up at me with those burning gold eyes, and I saw the doubt there, the fear, the old trauma that would take years to fully heal. But I also saw hope, the first fragile shoots of belief that maybe, just maybe, I was telling the truth. "How do you know?" he whispered. "Because I know you," I said firmly. "I've watched you every day for 2 years. I've seen how gentle you are with the baby rabbits we release from our traps. I've seen how carefully you touch the wildflowers so you don't break their stems. I've seen how you share your food with the birds, even when you're still hungry yourself. I've seen how you try so hard to help me, even when the tasks are too big for your small hands. That's not a bad person, Ash. That's a good person. That's a beautiful soul." He was quiet for a long moment, processing my words, turning them over in his mind like stones he was examining. Then he asked very softly, "Why do you love me?" The question broke my heart, this child asking why someone could possibly love him, as if love was something that had to be earned, a prize awarded only to the worthy. "Oh, baby," I said, cupping his face in my hands, looking into his eyes. "I don't love you because of anything you do or don't do. I don't love you because you're good, though you are. I don't love you because you're special, though you are that too. I love you because you're you. Because the moment I saw you in that dark place, scared and hurt and alone, my heart recognized you. My soul called out to yours. I love you because you're mine and I'm yours, and nothing in this world can change that. Not distance, not time, not anything. I will love you forever, no matter what. That's what a mama does. She loves her baby, always." His eyes filled with tears, and this time he let them fall, let himself cry openly, safely, knowing that tears didn't bring pain anymore, that emotions were allowed, that he was safe. "Love you, Mama," he whispered, his small voice thick with tears and trust and devotion. "Love you so much," and I knew, in that moment, that I would burn the world down to keep him safe, that there was nothing I wouldn't do, no sacrifice I wouldn't make, for this child who had become my reason for breathing. "I love you too, baby," I whispered back. "More than all the stars in the sky, more than all the trees in the forest, more than anything in this world or the next." The years passed, measured in seasons rather than calendars, in growth spurts and new skills learned rather than birthdays and official milestones. Ash grew like a weed, shooting up in height and strength, his body becoming lean and muscular from our life in the wilderness. By the time he was 5 years old, he looked 10. A beautiful child with wild black hair that I'd learned to braid to keep it from his face, though it was always escaping, always tangling, always looking like he'd just tumbled out of bed. His eyes were still that startling gold, a mark of his royal blood and his powerful wolf, a constant reminder of who he really was beneath the wilderness life we'd built. His skin had developed a warm tan from hours spent in the dappled sunlight of the forest, a stark contrast to the deathly pallor he'd had in the dungeon. He was healthy and strong and vibrant, a completely different child from the broken baby I'd stolen away. He moved through the thornwood like he was born to it, and in a way he was. This forest had raised him as much as I had. He could move silent as a shadow, his footsteps making no sound on the forest floor. He could climb trees like a squirrel, his arms and legs finding holds that seemed impossible, shimmying up trunks and leaping from branch to branch with a fearless grace that gave me heart palpitations every time I watched. He could track a rabbit through a rainstorm, following the faintest traces of scent and disturbed earth with a hunter's instinct. He could swim like an otter, diving deep into the pools and streams, holding his breath for impossible lengths of time, coming up sleek and laughing. He had become a creature of the wild, my beautiful, untamed son. But he was also gentle, compassionate in ways that had nothing to do with the forest and everything to do with his fundamental nature. He would spend hours watching a bird build its nest, his expression one of rapt wonder, his body perfectly still so as not to frighten the creature. He would bring me wildflowers, carefully selected bouquets of whatever was blooming, the stems clutched carefully in his small, increasingly capable hands, his face lighting up when I thanked him and arranged them in one of our clay pots. He would curl up next to me at night, his head on my shoulder, and ask me to tell him stories about the world beyond our forest. He wanted to know everything, his mind hungry for knowledge, for understanding, for connection to a world he'd never really known. I told him about his father, the Alpha King. I didn't lie or sugarcoat the truth. I told him that Theron was a powerful, complicated man who had lost his way in grief, that he had made terrible mistakes, but that they came from a place of profound pain rather than malice. I told him that his mother, Lyanna, had been beautiful and kind, with golden hair that caught the sunlight and a laugh that could fill an entire room with joy. I told him that she had wanted him desperately, that she had loved him from the moment she knew he existed, that her last act in this world had been to protect him, even though it cost her everything. I told him that he was a prince, heir to a great pack, that somewhere out there was a kingdom that was rightfully his, wolves who should be his, family, a legacy waiting to be claimed. But I also told him, and this was the most important part, that he didn't have to be defined by blood or title or the expectations of others. He could choose his own path. He could be whoever he wanted to be. He could stay in the forest forever if that made him happy, or he could venture out into the world and claim his birthright, or he could do something else entirely, forge a completely new path that no one had considered. The choice was his, and I would support him no matter what he decided. You're not a prince because of who your father is, I would tell him. You're a prince because of who you are, because of the nobility of your heart, because of the courage in your spirit. That's what makes someone royal, Ash. Not crowns or titles, but character. And you have more character in your little finger than most wolves have in their entire bodies. What if he doesn't want me, Mama? Ash asked one night when he was about 4 years old, but looking like an 8-year-old, his voice uncertain, vulnerable in a way he rarely allowed himself to be anymore. We were sitting by our fire, and he'd been quieter than usual all day, lost in thought. What if Father thinks I'm a monster like everyone else did? What if he looks at me and wishes I'd never been born? The fear in his voice, the old trauma resurfacing, made my heart ache. I cupped his face in my hands, looking into his eyes with all the fierce certainty I possessed. Then he's a fool, I said, my voice strong and clear, and you will be better than him. You already are. You're brave and kind and loving. You care about others. You try to do the right thing even when it's hard. Those are the qualities that matter, Ash, not power or position or what other people think of you. If your father can't see how amazing you are, if he can't appreciate the incredible person you've become, then that's his loss, not yours. You don't need his approval to be worthy. You don't need his love to be lovable. You have mine, and that's never going to change. But secretly, in the quiet moments when Ash was asleep and I was alone with my thoughts, I worried. I worried about what would happen if Theron ever found us. I worried about what it would do to Ash if his father rejected him again, if the king looked at his feral wilderness-raised son and saw only the monster he'd been told about. I worried about whether I had done the right thing, taking him away, raising him in isolation, denying him the chance to know his pack, his heritage, his father. Had I saved him or simply stolen him for my own purposes? Had I given him freedom or just traded one prison for another? These questions haunted me, kept me awake at night, made me second-guess every decision I'd made. But then I would watch him, see his joy as he played in the stream, or practiced his hunting skills, or simply sat in a patch of sunlight with his eyes closed and a contented smile on his face. I would see the way he had no fear, no hesitation, no crushing self-doubt. He knew he was loved. He knew he was safe. He knew he had value. And I would remember the tiny, terrified baby in the dungeon, silver chains burning his skin, surrounded by darkness and cold and pain. I would remember his silence, his resignation, the way he had already given up on the world at 3 months old, and I would know with absolute certainty that I had done the right thing. Whatever else happened, whatever the future held, I'd given him this. 5 years of childhood, 5 years of being loved and safe and free. That was worth any price. As Ash grew older, I began to notice changes that worried me. He was becoming restless, his wolf more active, more difficult to satisfy with our quiet forest life. He would disappear for hours, sometimes even overnight, running in his wolf form through the deep forest, pushing himself harder and faster, testing his limits. He started asking more questions about the outside world, about other wolves, about packs and politics, and the territories beyond the thornwood. He was lonely, I realized with a pang of guilt. He loved me, I never doubted that, but I was the only wolf he'd ever really known, the only person in his entire world. He needed more. He needed friends, packmates, other young wolves to run with and play with and test himself against. He needed a father, a male role model who could teach him things I couldn't, who could show him what it meant to be an alpha male. He needed a bigger world than the one I could provide, and that knowledge hurt even as I recognized its truth. I was trying to figure out how to address this, how to give him what he needed without losing him or putting him in danger when the decision was taken out of my hands entirely. It started subtly. Small signs that I almost missed because I'd grown so comfortable, so complacent in our isolation. Strange scents on the wind, wolf, but not the wild wolves we occasionally encountered. These smells were pack wolves, organized and purposeful. Then tracks, too deliberate to be from casual travelers, too organized to be from hunters. Someone was searching the thornwood, and they were searching methodically, with a grid pattern that was slowly, inexorably, closing in on our location. My blood ran cold when I realized what was happening. They had found us. After 5 years, they had finally found us. I woke Ash before dawn on the morning I knew we had to run, my heart hammering with fear and desperation. "We need to go, baby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to let him see how terrified I was. "Pack your things, only what you can carry. We need to leave now." His eyes widened, instantly alert despite having been sound asleep moments before, his wolf's instincts picking up on my fear. "Why, Mama? What's wrong?" "Someone's coming," I said, throwing our few possessions into our packs. "Wolves from the pack. They've been searching the forest, and they're getting close. We need to go deeper. Need to hide somewhere they won't find us." But even as I said it, I knew it was probably futile. If they'd managed to track us this far, if they'd overcome their fear of the thornwood enough to search it this thoroughly, they wouldn't give up now. They would keep looking until they found us, but I had to try. I couldn't just give up, couldn't just hand Ash over without a fight. We moved deeper into the forest, toward the heart of the thornwood, where even the bravest hunters feared to tread, where the trees grew so thick that light barely penetrated, where the old magic was strongest and most dangerous. Ash followed without question, his small pack on his back, his face set with determination. He trusted me completely, believed I would keep him safe, and that trust was both a gift and a terrible burden. We traveled for 3 days, barely stopping, eating as we walked, sleeping in shifts. But it wasn't enough. We weren't fast enough, skilled enough, lucky enough. On the 3rd day, as we were crossing a rocky ravine, our feet slipping on loose stones, our breath coming in gasps from exhaustion, they found us. 6 wolves emerged from the tree line, massive and battle-scarred, their presence a physical force that made the air feel thick and heavy. They shifted into their human forms, powerful men with hard eyes and silver weapons strapped to their bodies. And at their center, standing with a presence that seemed to suck the air from the clearing, that made every instinct I had scream danger and submit and run, was him. Theron, the Alpha King, the father Ash had never known, the man I'd spent 5 years running from. He was not what I remembered. 5 years ago, when I'd seen him at his mate's funeral, he'd been a grieving shell, hollow-eyed and broken, a man who looked like he wanted nothing more than to follow his beloved into death. He'd been thin, almost gaunt, his skin pale, his movements listless. He'd been the walking dead, going through the motions of living without any real engagement with the world. Now, standing before me in the clearing, he was a completely different creature. He was a force of nature, power incarnate, an alpha in his absolute prime. He stood well over 6 feet tall, his body a mass of controlled power, muscles moving beneath his skin like steel cables wrapped in silk. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his chest deep, his arms thick with the kind of strength that came from years of constant training and combat. His hair was still black, but now it was shot through with silver at the temples, giving him a distinguished, dangerous look. His face was all hard angles and sharp edges, high cheekbones and a strong jaw, covered with dark stubble. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, a thick white line that suggested a wound that should have taken his eye but hadn't. And there were other scars visible on his neck and hands, the marks of a warrior who had survived countless battles. But it was his eyes that held me frozen, that made my breath catch, and my wolf whimper in recognition of a predator far above us in the hierarchy. They were ice blue, cold and merciless, the eyes of a winter storm, the eyes of a predator who had learned to kill without hesitation or remorse. They were the eyes of a king who had been forged in fire and loss, who had learned to rule through fear and strength because gentleness and compassion had gotten him nothing but pain. He was dressed in black leather and furs, practical warrior's garb that allowed for easy movement, with a massive sword strapped to his back, the hilt visible over his shoulder. He looked like a warlord, a conqueror, a king who had learned that the only way to keep his throne was to be harder and more ruthless than anyone who might challenge him. His gaze swept the clearing, cold and calculating, dismissing his men, dismissing the landscape, taking in everything with the efficiency of a predator, assessing a battlefield. Then his eyes landed on Ash, and everything stopped. The world seemed to hold its breath. Time slowed to a crawl. My son stood slightly in front of me, his small body tense, his posture protective despite the fact that he was a 10-year-old-looking child facing 6 adult male warriors and an alpha king. His eyes were blazing gold, brighter than I'd ever seen them, his wolf so close to the surface that I could see the shift starting, could see the claws beginning to emerge from his fingertips. He was growling, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the ground, through my bones, a sound that no child his age should be able to produce. It was a challenge, a warning, a declaration of intent. He was telling these strangers, these intruders, that they would have to go through him to get to me. The Alpha King went absolutely still. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. The warriors looked confused, uncertain, glancing between their king and the growling child, not understanding what was happening, why their alpha had frozen like a statue. Then Theron took a step forward, and several things happened at once. Ash's growl intensified, becoming almost a roar, his body lowering into a crouch, preparing to spring. The warriors' hands went to their weapons, ready to defend their king. And I moved without thinking, placing myself fully in front of Ash, spreading my arms wide, making myself a shield between the child and the men who could kill us both with barely any effort. The king stopped, his ice-blue eyes fixing on me with an intensity that made me want to shrink back, to submit, to bare my throat and beg for mercy. But I held my ground, lifted my chin, met his gaze, even though every instinct I had was screaming at me to look away, to submit to the alpha, to acknowledge his dominance. "You," he said, his voice a low rasp that seemed to come from the depths of the earth, like rocks grinding together, like thunder rolling across mountains. His voice was power made audible, authority that couldn't be questioned. "You're the servant, the Omega from the kitchens." His eyes narrowed, and I saw recognition dawn, saw memory clicking into place. "Kira. Your name is Kira." I was shocked that he remembered me, that he had somehow retained the name of an insignificant Omega servant from 5 years ago, but I didn't let it show on my face. I lifted my chin higher, refusing to be intimidated despite the fact that I was absolutely terrified. "I am Kira," I confirmed, my voice steadier than I'd expected, stronger than I felt. "And you need to leave. Now." A harsh, disbelieving laugh escaped him, though there was no humor in it, only shock and something that might have been admiration or might have been anger. "Leave? You stole my son. You disappeared into the wilderness with the heir to my pack, with my only child, with the last piece of my mate I had left in this world. I have been searching for 5 years. 5 years of not knowing if he was alive or dead, 5 years of wondering if I'd failed him completely, 5 years of hoping and despairing in equal measure." His voice rose to a roar that echoed off the rocks, that sent birds fleeing from the trees. "And you tell me to leave?" "I stole nothing," I shot back, my fear transforming into anger, into righteous fury at the injustice of his accusation. "I saved him. I saved him from the silver chains you bound him in like an animal. I saved him from the dungeon you threw him into like he was garbage, like he was something to be hidden away and forgotten. I saved him from the cell where he screamed himself hoarse and no one came, where he starved and lay in his own filth and suffered for crimes he never committed. I saved him from the advisors who were planning to kill him and blame it on fever, who were going to murder an infant and tell you it was a mercy. My voice was shaking now, tears of rage streaming down my face. I saved your son's life, Alpha King. So don't you dare act like I'm the villain in this story. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might collapse. His warriors looked shocked, glancing at each other with confusion and growing horror. One of them, a grizzled beta with a scarred face and gray in his hair, took a step forward. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, his voice uncertain, "is this true?" The king seemed to struggle to find words, his jaw clenching and unclenching, his hands fisting at his sides. "What?" he finally managed, his voice barely more than a whisper. "Chains? Dungeon? What are you talking about?" The child was in the royal nursery. Chancellor Mordain assured me personally that he was being cared for by the best wet nurses and healers in the pack. He said the boy's wolf was unstable, that he needed to be monitored carefully, but that he was safe, comfortable, cared for. The sheer devastating ignorance in his voice, the genuine confusion and growing horror, hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't known. Moon Goddess help me, he hadn't known what was being done to his son. "Mordain told you the child was in a nursery?" I said, my voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "Well, let me tell you where he really was, Alpha King. Let me paint you a picture of how your most trusted advisor was caring for your heir. He was in the lowest dungeon, the one where you keep the traitors and the murderers, the one that's so deep underground that no sunlight ever reaches it. He was in a cell barely big enough for a grown man to lie down in, with no bed, no blankets, nothing but moldy straw crawling with rats. He had silver chains on his wrists and ankles, chains so tight they burned into his skin, left scars he'll carry for the rest of his life. He was fed once a day if he was lucky, scraps that wouldn't be fit for a dog. His waste bucket was emptied maybe once a week. He was 3 months old, and he was alone in the dark, in pain, terrified, and no one came. No one cared. No one checked on him except to make sure he was still alive so they could kill him themselves when the time was right." With each word, Theron looked more devastated, more destroyed. His face had gone from pale to ashen gray, his eyes wide with horror, his entire body trembling. Behind him, his warriors looked equally shocked, their expressions ranging from disbelief to dawning fury. The beta who had spoken earlier made a choking sound, his hand coming up to cover his mouth. "Impossible," Theron whispered, but there was no conviction in his voice, only desperate denial. "Mordain wouldn't. He couldn't. He was my father's most trusted advisor. He served our family for 40 years. I saw his face when Lyanna died, saw his grief, his concern for me. He wouldn't betray me like that. He wouldn't hurt a child. Mordain is a liar and a traitor and a murderer," I hissed, taking a step forward, my anger overriding my self-preservation instincts. "He poisoned your mate. He killed Lyanna so he could manipulate you, so he could control you through your grief." I was there that night, Alpha King. I saw the midwife add something to the queen's water. I saw Lyanna's face when she realized she'd been poisoned. I saw her try to warn someone, try to tell someone what had been done to her, but she died before she could speak. And then I watched that same midwife deliberately hurt your newborn son, hurt him so he would cry and shift and look dangerous, so everyone would think he was a monster instead of a victim. Your son didn't kill his mother, Theron. Your advisor did. And then he tried to finish the job by torturing an infant and planning his murder. The king made a sound I'd never heard before. A low, anguished keen that was barely recognizable as coming from a human throat. It was the sound of a man's entire world shattering, of every belief he'd held being torn apart, of grief and guilt and rage colliding into something too big and terrible to contain. He staggered, actually staggered, and the beta rushed to his side to steady him. The other warriors looked uncertain, hands still on their weapons, but clearly not knowing what to do, who to protect, how to process what they were hearing. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Theron straightened, and when he looked at me again, his ice-blue eyes were filled with tears, real tears, streaming down his face, cutting tracks through the dirt and stubble on his cheeks. "Prove it," he whispered, his voice broken, shattered into pieces. "Please, Moon Goddess, please tell me you can prove what you're saying. Tell me I didn't abandon my son to that hell. Tell me I'm not the monster here." I told him everything, every detail I could remember from that terrible night 5 years ago. I described the midwife's appearance, the strange scent that had clung to her, the oily sheen on the water she'd given the queen. I told him about the poison's effects, how Lyanna had convulsed and bled internally, how her wolf had tried desperately to heal her, but couldn't because the poison was designed specifically to target wolves, to overwhelm our healing abilities. I told him about the baby's birth, healthy and perfect and small, about how the midwife had deliberately hurt him to provoke his wolf. I told him about the advisors who had been present, how they'd whispered to each other, how they'd looked satisfied rather than horrified when the queen died. I told him about overhearing Mordain and the guard captain 3 days later about the plan to kill the child and claim it was illness. And then I told him about finding Ash in the dungeon, about the chains and the filth and the suffering, about how his son had spoken at 3 months old because his wolf was so strong, so present, so desperately trying to protect his human half from the trauma. As I spoke, the king's men shifted uncomfortably. The beta, whose name I would later learn was Marcus, stepped forward again. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, his voice thick with emotion. "The Omega's words have the ring of truth about them." And, he hesitated, then continued in a rush, "there were always whispers about the Chancellor, rumors we were told to ignore, questions we were ordered not to ask. Some of us, the older warriors who served your father, we wondered about things that didn't add up. The Queen's sudden illness despite being healthy hours before. The child's immediate imprisonment instead of the careful monitoring that was claimed. The way Mordain controlled all access to you in those early months, how he chose who could speak to you and when. The way anyone who questioned his decisions found themselves reassigned to distant outposts or discharged entirely." Another warrior spoke up, younger but with the bearing of a seasoned fighter. "I was assigned to dungeon duty once, about 4 years ago. I heard sounds from the lower levels, crying that didn't sound like a prisoner, sounded like a child. When I asked about it, I was told I was hearing rats and reassigned the next day. I always wondered, but I thought surely our king wouldn't keep a child in such a place." The admission hung in the air, heavy and damning. These loyal warriors, good men who had served faithfully, had seen signs, had heard whispers, but had dismissed them because the alternative was too horrible to contemplate. They had trusted in their king's goodness, in their chancellor's wisdom, and that trust had allowed a terrible injustice to continue. Theron's hands clenched into fists so tight his knuckles turned white, his nails digging into his palms hard enough that I could smell blood. "Where is Mordain now?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous, vibrating with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. "At the fortress, my lord," Marcus replied. "Ruling as your regent in your absence, you've been gone for 3 months on this search and he's been handling all pack business, making decisions in your name." The king's eyes closed, and I saw his jaw clench so hard I heard his teeth grind. When they opened again, they were filled with a cold, lethal fury that made me glad I wasn't the target of that gaze. "We return," he said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Now, all of you, prepare to move out immediately. We make for the fortress at top speed. We have a traitor to deal with." But then his gaze fell on me and Ash again, and his expression shifted, became something more complicated, layered with guilt and grief and desperate hope. "You will come with us," he said. And this time it wasn't quite a command, wasn't quite a request, existed somewhere in between. "My son," his voice broke on the word, "my son needs to come home. He needs proper medical care to check those scars you mentioned, proper nutrition, proper shelter. And you," he looked at me with an intensity that made my heart race, "you saved his life when I failed him. You gave him what I should have given him, what I was too blind and too foolish to see he needed. I owe you a debt I can never repay. Please, please come home with us. Let me try to make this right. Let me try to be the father he deserves." Ash, who had been silent through this entire exchange, his growl finally fading as he listened to the adults talk, moved so fast he was a blur. One moment he was beside me, the next he was between me and his father, his body low and coiled, every line of him screaming danger and challenge. His eyes were blazing gold, his wolf fully present, his lips pulling back to show teeth that were sharper than they should be, longer than a human child's. "No," he snarled, his voice rough from disuse, but clear, strong, certain. "You don't take Mama, you hurt her. You'll hurt her again. Mama stays with me, or you don't take either of us." Theron froze, and the expression that crossed his face was devastating. It was the first time he'd heard his son's voice, really heard him speak, and the words were a rejection, a condemnation, a declaration that this child saw him as a threat rather than a father. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in all the territories, the man who could bring grown alphas to their knees with a look, dropped to the ground. Not just knelt, but fully prostrated himself, his face pressed to the earth, his body language screaming submission, an alpha making himself smaller, lower, less threatening. "I would never hurt her," he said, his voice muffled by the dirt but still audible, still clear. "I swear it on my life, on my crown, on the moon goddess herself, on the memory of your mother, who I loved more than my own existence. She..." He lifted his head slightly, looking at me with those ice-blue eyes that were now filled with tears and terrible sincerity. "She saved you. She gave up everything, her home, her pack, her safety, any chance at a normal life. She lived in the wilderness for 5 years, hunted and foraged and survived, all to protect a child who wasn't even hers by blood. She is the reason you're alive, the reason you're healthy, the reason you're here at all. I owe her a debt I can never repay." His gaze shifted back to Ash, and his voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "I failed you, my son. I failed you in every way a father can fail his child. I wasn't there when you needed me. I didn't protect you. I didn't save you. I let them hurt you, let them chain you, let them leave you alone in the dark, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make that right, trying to earn your forgiveness, trying to be worthy of being called your father. But I swear to you, on everything I am and everything I have, I will never, ever hurt the woman who saved you. She will be honored and protected and cherished for as long as I draw breath." Ash looked at him for a long, silent moment, those golden eyes searching, evaluating, trying to determine truth from lies, sincerity from manipulation. Then he looked back at me, a question in his gaze. "What do I do, Mama? Should we trust him?" My heart squeezed. This child, this brave, fierce, wonderful child, was asking my permission, was trusting my judgment, even in this moment when his entire world was shifting beneath his feet. I knelt beside him, ignoring the warriors and the king, focusing only on my son. "I don't know, baby," I said honestly, because I'd always tried to be truthful with him, even when it was hard. "I don't know if we can trust him. I don't know what will happen if we go with them," but I took a deep breath. I think he's telling the truth. I think he really didn't know what was being done to you. I think he's been lied to and manipulated, and I think he's drowning in guilt right now. And I hesitated, then continued, "I think you deserve the chance to know your father. You deserve the chance to decide for yourself what kind of relationship you want with him. Not what I decide, not what he decides, but what you want." Ash bit his lip, a gesture so young and uncertain that it made my heart ache. Then he asked very quietly, "Will you stay with me? If we go, will you stay? Or will you leave me there?" Like he didn't finish the sentence, but I heard the unspoken words like my father did, like everyone does. I pulled him into a fierce hug, holding him tight, trying to pour all my love and certainty into the embrace. "I will never leave you," I said, my voice shaking with emotion. "Never, Ash. Not for anything or anyone. Where you go, I go. If you decide you don't like it there and you want to come back to the forest, we'll come back together. If you decide you want to stay, I'll stay. You're my son, and nothing will ever change that. We're a family, you and me, and families stick together no matter what." He relaxed slightly in my arms, then pulled back and looked at his father, who was still prostrated on the ground, still waiting with the patience of a predator, showing no sign of impatience or frustration at being made to wait. "Okay," Ash said, his voice small but clear. "We'll go, but..." He straightened, and I saw a flash of the alpha he would one day become, saw the royal blood asserting itself. "If anyone hurts Mama, if anyone makes her sad or scared, I'll leave, and you won't find me again. The Thornwood is big, and I know places even your best trackers won't find." Theron rose to his feet, slowly, carefully, still keeping his movements non-threatening. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, but his expression was one of solemn respect. "Understood," he said simply. "You have my word. As your father and your king, no one will harm her. Anyone who tries will answer to me." The journey back to the Shadowpine Fortress took 4 days, and it was one of the strangest, most surreal experiences of my life. We traveled as an odd, fractured group, existing in multiple layers of tension and tentative peace. The king and his men led the way, powerful warriors moving with military precision, but they kept a careful distance from Ash and me, giving us space, showing respect rather than dominance. Theron himself hung back, sometimes walking parallel to us, but never approaching directly, never trying to force interaction. He would watch Ash, though, moon goddess. He would watch his son with an expression of such profound grief and longing and desperate hope that it made my chest physically ache. Here was a man who had just discovered he'd unknowingly abandoned his child to torture, and the weight of that guilt was crushing him. Ash remained wary, his hand almost always in mine, his body angled protectively in front of me whenever the warriors came too close. But I could see his curiosity growing, see the way his eyes would drift to his father when he thought no one was looking, see the questions building behind his guarded expression. At night, when we made camp, the divide was stark. The warriors would set up on one side of the clearing, building their fire, cooking their meal, talking in low voices. Ash and I would set up on the other side, using our own supplies, maintaining our own space. We would sleep with him curled against me, his small face buried in my shoulder, just like we'd done for 5 years in our cave. "Not going back in the dark place, Mama," he would whisper every night, the fear still there despite all my reassurances. "I promise, baby," I would whisper back, holding him tight. "Never again. I'll die before I let anyone put you in a dark place again." On the second night, something shifted. As the others slept, I saw movement from the other camp. Theron was approaching, moving slowly and deliberately, making no effort to hide his presence. Ash tensed, a growl building in his throat, but I put a hand on his arm. "Wait," I said softly. "Let's see what he wants." The king stopped at a respectful distance, maybe 10 feet away, and slowly, deliberately lowered himself to the ground, sitting cross-legged in a position that was non-threatening, vulnerable even. It put his head below ours since we were sitting on a slight rise, a subtle acknowledgement of our right to refuse him. "May I speak with you?" he asked quietly, his voice gentle, nothing like the commanding roar I'd heard in the clearing. "Both of you, if you're willing. Or just Kira, if that's easier." I looked at Ash, letting him decide. He was silent for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Theron's entire body seemed to relax fractionally at the permission. "I didn't know," he began without preamble, his voice tight with emotion. "About the chains, about the dungeon, about any of it. Mordain told me." He stopped, took a breath, started again. "When Lyanna died, I broke, completely. I wanted to follow her into death. The only thing that stopped me was duty, the knowledge that the pack needed their alpha. But I was a shell, going through the motions. Mordain handled everything. He told me the child was being cared for in the royal nursery, that he had nurses and healers watching him constantly. He said the boy's wolf was unusually strong and needed careful monitoring, but that he was safe, comfortable, healthy. He said I couldn't see him because my grief was too fresh, my emotions too unstable, that I might inadvertently harm the child in my state. And the word was bitter, self-loathing. I believed him. I trusted him. I let him handle it because I couldn't bear to look at my son, couldn't bear to see Lyanna's eyes in his face and know she was gone. The raw pain in his voice was undeniable, the anguish of a man confronting his worst failures. "You were grieving," I said quietly, though I wasn't trying to excuse him, just trying to understand. Grief makes us vulnerable. It makes us believe things we wouldn't normally believe, trust people we shouldn't trust. "Grief is not an excuse for abdication," he said fiercely, his ice blue eyes flashing. "I'm the Alpha King. I'm responsible for every wolf in my pack, and especially for my own son. I should have checked on him myself. I should have insisted on seeing him, on holding him, on being his father even through my pain. I should have known something was wrong. But I was so lost in my own suffering that I failed him completely." His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "How can I ever make that right? How can I ever earn his forgiveness for what I allowed to happen?" "I don't know if you can," I said honestly. "Ash is the only one who can decide that. But," I hesitated, then continued, "I will tell you that healing takes time. Trust takes time. You can't rush it or force it. You can only show up every day and prove through your actions that you're worthy of that trust. Words are easy. Actions are what matter." Theron nodded, his gaze shifting to Ash, who was watching this exchange with wide golden eyes. Then, very carefully, he reached into a pocket in his leather vest and pulled something out. With slow, deliberate movements, he held it out toward us. It was a small carved figure, a wolf cub made of dark wood, the detail exquisite despite its size. "This," he said softly, "was your mother's. She carried it always, said it reminded her of her childhood, of simpler times. I've kept it since she died. I thought," he swallowed hard, "I thought maybe you might want it, a piece of her, something that she loved." Ash stared at the carving for a long moment, then looked at me. "Can I?" he asked, seeking permission, and I nodded. He reached out slowly and took the small wolf from his father's hand, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. Ash turned the carving over in his hands, examining it with the careful attention he gave to everything important, his fingertips tracing the smooth wood, the delicate carved features. "It's beautiful," he whispered, his voice filled with wonder. "She really kept this?" "Always," Theron said, his voice thick. "She said it was her good luck charm. She called it Little Moon because she found it under a full moon when she was a child." His eyes were wet again. "She would have loved you so much, Ash, every day, every moment. You would have been her entire world." Ash looked up at his father, and for the first time there was something other than wariness in his expression. There was curiosity and longing, and the tentative beginnings of hope. "What was she like?" he asked, his voice small. "Tell me about her, not the queen stuff, just her. As a person." Theron's face transformed. The hard warrior king disappeared, replaced by a man remembering someone he'd loved beyond reason. She was sunshine, he began, settling more comfortably on the ground, his eyes distant with memory, literally. When she walked into a room, it was like clouds parting and light pouring in. She had this laugh, this absolutely ridiculous snorting laugh when something really amused her, and she hated it, would get so embarrassed. But I loved it. I would try to make her laugh just to hear that sound. He continued talking, and Ash listened with rapt attention, drinking in every detail about the mother he'd never known. I learned things I'd never heard in the official histories. Lyanna had been terrible at embroidery, had stabbed herself with the needle so many times she'd finally given up and declared it a death sport. She'd loved to run in her wolf form through the mountain meadows, racing the wind just for the joy of speed. She'd had a weakness for honey cakes and would sneak into the kitchens late at night to steal them, leaving the confused cooks to wonder where their inventory was disappearing to. She'd sung constantly, terribly off-key, driving everyone around her crazy but doing it anyway because it made her happy. She'd been fierce in defense of the weak, had personally funded a school for orphaned pups, had spent hours in the healing ward sitting with sick wolves and keeping them company. "She sounds wonderful," Ash said when his father finally wound down, his voice wistful. "I wish I could have known her." "Me too, baby," I said softly, putting my arm around him. "But you know what? I think she'd be really proud of you, of how brave you are, how kind, how you've survived and thrived despite everything." Theron nodded emphatically. "She would have loved your spirit, the fact that you protect those you love so fiercely. That was one of the things I loved most about her, that fierce protectiveness. You have that same quality." He paused, then added quietly, "Thank you for telling him about her, for not letting her be forgotten, for raising him to be someone she would have been proud of." The conversation ended shortly after, Theron returning to his side of the camp, but something had shifted. A small crack had appeared in the wall between father and son, a tiny opening through which trust might eventually flow. That night, Ash fell asleep clutching the carved wolf his mother had loved, his other hand holding tight to mine, bridging his past and his present, his blood family and his chosen family. On the third night of our journey, Theron approached again during a quiet moment when Ash had wandered to a nearby stream to wash up under the watchful eyes of Beta Marcus. The king settled onto the ground near me, maintaining respectful distance but close enough for private conversation. His expression was serious, troubled. "I need to ask you something," he said without preamble, "and I need you to be honest with me, even if the truth is harsh." I waited, sensing this was important. "When you took Ash, when you fled into the thornwood," he paused, searching for words. "Did you hate me? Do you hate me now?" His ice-blue eyes were vulnerable in a way that seemed impossible for such a powerful alpha. "I deserve your hatred. I failed as a king, as a father, as a wolf. I let my grief blind me to what was happening in my own fortress. I abandoned my son to torment. So I need to know, when you look at me, do you see a monster?" I considered the question carefully, because he deserved honesty, not platitudes. "I was angry at you," I said slowly, "furious even, but I never hated you. Hatred is what I felt for Mordain, for the midwife, for the people who deliberately hurt an innocent child. You were a different kind of failure. You were a man so broken by loss that you couldn't see what was right in front of you. That's not the same as malice. It's weakness maybe, or blindness, but not evil." "Is there a difference?" he asked bitterly, "when the result is the same?" "Yes," I said firmly. "There's a huge difference. Malice can't be redeemed. It's a corruption of the soul. But weakness, blindness, those can be overcome. You can learn from them, grow from them, become better. The question isn't whether you failed, because you did. The question is what you do now. Do you wallow in guilt and self-pity, or do you learn from your mistakes and become the father Ash deserves?" Theron was quiet for a long moment, staring into the darkness beyond our firelight. "I don't know how to be a father," he finally admitted. "I never had the chance to learn. My own father was a great king but a distant parent. I thought I'd have years to figure it out, years to grow into the role with Lyanna guiding me. Now I'm facing a 10-year-old looking child who's lived a lifetime of trauma, who looks at me like I'm a stranger and I have no idea what I'm doing." "Then start simple," I suggested. "Be present, listen when he talks, show interest in the things that matter to him. Don't try to be the perfect father right away, because perfection is impossible and the pressure will paralyze you. Just try to be a little better each day. Try to be someone he can trust, someone who shows up, someone who keeps their promises, the big stuff, the deep bonding that comes later, built on a foundation of small, consistent actions." He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. "Will you help me?" he asked, and there was no royal command in his voice, just a plea. "Will you teach me how to reach him?" You know him better than anyone. You know what he needs, what frightens him, what comforts him. I'm asking not as your king, but as a desperate father who wants to do right by his son. Please." I studied him for a long moment, this powerful alpha reduced to begging an omega for guidance. That takes courage, I realized. Real courage, the kind that has nothing to do with physical strength or dominance, and everything to do with admitting vulnerability, acknowledging inadequacy, asking for help. "I'll help," I said finally, "for Ash's sake, not yours, because he deserves to have a relationship with his father if that's what he wants. But," I fixed him with a stern look, "you have to understand that I won't let you hurt him. Not physically, not emotionally, not in any way. The moment you become a threat to his well-being, I will take him and disappear, and you'll never find us again. I've kept us hidden for 5 years. I can do it again. I know every hidden corner of the Thornwood, every secret path, every place where even the best trackers can't follow. So if you want my help, you have to earn it, every day, every moment. Understood?" "Understood," he said without hesitation, "and I wouldn't want it any other way. A mother who would fight a king to protect her child, that's exactly who I want raising my son. That's exactly who he needs." We sat in companionable silence for a while, watching the fire crackle and pop, listening to the night sounds of the forest. Then Theron spoke again, his voice softer. "May I ask how you did it? How you survived out there with a child? I'm a warrior, trained for survival, and even I find the Thornwood daunting. How did an Omega servant with no wilderness training manage for 5 years?" I smiled slightly. Desperation is a powerful teacher, and love makes you capable of things you never imagined. I had to learn or we'd die, so I learned. I made mistakes, plenty of them. I ate poisonous mushrooms, lost equipment, nearly froze that first winter. But Ash needed me, and that need made me strong enough, smart enough, determined enough to survive. "You're remarkable," he said simply, and there was genuine admiration in his voice. "The pack thinks of Omegas as weak, as needing protection and care, but you're one of the strongest wolves I've ever met. Strength isn't always about physical power." I shook my head. "Thank you, but I'm not special. Any mother would do the same for her child." He made a sound of disagreement. "No, not any mother. Many would have given up, would have brought him back and hoped for mercy. You didn't. You risked everything, sacrificed everything for a child who wasn't even yours by blood. That's not ordinary. That's extraordinary." Before I could respond, Ash returned from the stream, his hair wet and slicked back, his face clean, looking refreshed. He paused when he saw his father sitting near me, tension creeping back into his shoulders. "It's okay," I said softly. "We were just talking." He relaxed slightly and came to sit beside me, immediately leaning into my side with the unconscious trust of a child who knows he's safe. Theron watched this simple gesture of affection with undisguised longing, but he made no move to intrude, content simply to observe from a distance. On the 4th day, we finally emerged from the Thornwood. The change was stark and immediate. One moment we were surrounded by ancient trees and deep shadows, the next we were stepping out into open territory, cleared land marked with the boundaries of the Shadowpine Pack. In the distance, rising against the gray sky like something carved from the mountain itself, was the fortress. It was massive, far larger than I remembered from my servant days. Dark stone towers reached toward the clouds, their tops crowned with snapping black banners bearing the Pack's crest. Walls, thick enough to withstand any siege, surrounded the main structure, with guard towers positioned at strategic intervals. It was imposing, intimidating, designed to project power and permanence. It was the seat of the Alpha King, the heart of the most powerful pack in all the territories. Ash stopped walking, his hand tightening in mine. His eyes were huge, taking in the scope of the fortress, the sheer overwhelming scale of it. "Big," he whispered. And I heard the tremor in his voice, the fear creeping back in. Too big. Too many walls. I knelt beside him, cupping his face in my hands. "I know it's scary, baby. It's so different from our home in the forest. But remember what I promised you? If you don't like it, if you want to leave, we'll leave together. This doesn't have to be forever if you don't want it to be. We're just trying it, seeing if it might work. And I'll be with you every step of the way. You're not alone. You'll never be alone." He nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. Theron had approached quietly, keeping a respectful distance but close enough to hear. His expression was pained, clearly understanding how overwhelming this must be for a child raised in the wilderness. "The fortress is large," he said gently, addressing Ash directly, "but not all of it will be your concern. The royal wing is separate, quieter. Your rooms," he hesitated, correcting himself, "your and Kira's rooms, they're in a corner tower with windows overlooking the forest. You can open them wide, let in the air and the sounds. And if it feels like too much, if you need space, there are gardens, courtyards, places where you can be outside, where you can breathe. I made sure Marcus arranged for rooms that wouldn't feel like," He couldn't say the word, wouldn't feel closed in. Ash looked at him, evaluating, then nodded slightly. Okay, he said quietly. We can try. But Mama comes with me, everywhere. Always, Theron agreed immediately. Everywhere, I swear it. We resumed walking, and as we approached the main gates, wolves began to pour out. Warriors, servants, pack members of all ranks streaming out to greet their king who had been gone for 3 months. They were shouting, relieved and joyous, clearly happy to see their alpha return safely. But their celebration died abruptly when they saw the small boy at my side. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through grass. The cursed child. The monster prince. He's alive. Moon goddess, preserve us. I felt Ash shrink against me, his confidence wavering under the weight of so many eyes, so much judgment and fear. His hand in mine was trembling, and I could feel his wolf rising, preparing to fight or flee. I knelt quickly, blocking out the crowd, making him focus only on me. Remember what I told you? I said firmly, loudly enough that nearby wolves could hear. You are not a monster. You are a prince. You are brave and strong and good. These people don't know you. They don't know the boy who saves baby rabbits and brings me wildflowers and reads stories by firelight. They're going to learn who you really are, but it will take time. Until then, you hold your head up. You are Ash, son of Lyanna and Theron, crown prince of the Shadowpine Pack, and you have nothing to be ashamed of. Theron stepped forward then, his voice ringing with authority that cut through the whispers like a blade. Silence. The crowd fell quiet immediately, hundreds of wolves going still at their alpha's command. This is my son, he announced, his voice carrying across the courtyard. Ash, crown prince of the Shadowpine Pack and heir to the Obsidian throne. And this, he gestured to me, is Kira, the woman who saved his life when I could not, who has protected and raised him for 5 years. They are family, they are pack, and they will be treated with the respect and honor they deserve. His ice blue eyes swept the crowd, and there was steel in his gaze. Anyone who harms them, anyone who speaks ill of them, anyone who shows them anything less than the courtesy owed to members of the royal household will answer to me personally. Have I made myself clear? A chorus of, "Yes," Alpha King echoed through the courtyard, voices raised in automatic obedience. But I could still see the doubt in many eyes, the fear, the suspicion. These wolves had been told for 5 years that the prince was a dangerous monster. They weren't going to change their minds based on a single speech, no matter how authoritative. But at least they would be polite to our faces, and that was a start. We were escorted into the fortress, through massive doors and down corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Servants bowed as we passed, their eyes downcast, but I could feel their curiosity, their fear, their judgment. Ash pressed close to my side, his breathing rapid, his eyes darting everywhere, taking in too much, overwhelmed by the sheer number of people, the noise, the smells, the oppressive weight of stone walls and high ceilings. Finally, mercifully, we reached our rooms. Theron had been true to his word. We were in a corner tower with large windows on 2 walls, the glass panes already open, letting in fresh air and the sound of wind through pine trees. The suite was spacious but not cavernous, with a main sitting room, a bedroom with a massive 4-poster bed, and a smaller adjoining room that could serve as Ash's personal space. There was a fireplace already lit, filling the room with warmth and the comforting smell of wood smoke. The furnishings were elegant but not overly ornate, comfortable rather than intimidating. Best of all, the windows looked out over the forest, giving an unobstructed view of trees and sky. Connection to the wild that I knew Ash would need. Ash went immediately to the windows, leaning out to breathe the outside air, his shoulders gradually relaxing as he confirmed that, yes, we could see the sky, yes, we could feel the wind, yes, this wasn't a trap or a cage. Better? I asked softly, coming to stand beside him. He nodded. Still too many walls, Mama, he said quietly, but the windows help. I can see out. That's good, I said. And remember, if you need to, we can go outside, into the gardens, or even into the forest if your father allows it. You're not trapped here. This is just a place to stay, to rest, to be safe. But you're always free, Ash. Always. Theron had remained in the doorway, giving us space, but now he spoke. A woman named Alara will be assigned as your attendant, he said. She's kind, patient, and she has grandchildren of her own. She'll help you with anything you need, bring meals, provide clean clothes, answer questions. But, he added firmly, she's there to help, not to control. You're free to refuse her assistance, to come and go as you please, to set your own schedule. You're not prisoners, you're family. Thank you, I said, meaning it, for the windows especially. You understood what he needed. A muscle twitched in his jaw. I'm trying, he said simply. I'm trying to be better, to think about what he needs rather than what's easiest for me. He paused. It's harder than leading armies or negotiating treaties, but it's more important. He cleared his throat. I'll leave you to settle in. Meals can be brought here if you prefer, or you can join me in the royal dining hall if and when you're ready. There's no pressure, no timeline. Move at whatever pace feels right for you, both of you." He started to leave, then paused. "Kira?" I looked at him questioningly. "Thank you. For everything, for being patient with me, for helping me, for," his voice broke slightly, "for saving him when I couldn't. I will never forget what I owe you. Never." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Ash and me alone in our new home. That first night in the fortress was difficult. The bed was too soft after years of sleeping on furs over sand, the room too quiet despite the open windows, the air too still and processed. Ash couldn't settle, tossing and turning, his body tense, his breathing rapid. Finally, well past midnight, I heard him whisper into the darkness, "Mama, I'm here, baby. What do you need? Can we sleep on the floor, like home? The bed is too much." "Of course," I said immediately. I grabbed pillows and blankets from the bed and made a nest on the floor near the fireplace, arranging them into something that resembled our sleeping area in the cave. We curled up together, Ash pressed against my side, his face buried in my neck, and finally, he relaxed. "This is better," he murmured, already half asleep. "Smells like you, feels like home." "Sleep, baby," I whispered, stroking his wild black hair. "I've got you, always." The next morning began what would become our new routine, a strange hybrid of our wilderness life and royal existence. We woke with the sun, as we always had. We ate breakfast in our rooms, simple fare that Alara brought, and that reminded me more of camp food than royal cuisine. Then, before the fortress fully woke, before the corridors filled with busy wolves going about their duties, we would slip outside. Theron had given us permission to access a private garden attached to the royal wing, a space that was surprisingly wild, more meadow than manicured lawn, with native plants and wildflowers and a small stream that burbled over rocks. It became our sanctuary, the place where Ash could breathe, could run in his wolf form, could pretend for a few hours that we were back in the forest. Beta Marcus often joined us during these morning excursions, having been assigned by Theron to serve as a sort of guard and guide. But Marcus was a good man, and he approached his duties with sensitivity. He would maintain a respectful distance, available if needed but not intrusive. Sometimes he would answer Ash's questions about the fortress, the pack, the territories beyond. Sometimes he would tell stories about Theron and Lyanna's courtship, stories that made Ash's eyes light up with interest. And sometimes he would simply sit quietly, a solid, reassuring presence that didn't demand anything. Theron himself appeared every morning, like clockwork, never missing a day despite the demands of ruling a kingdom. He would come to the garden, usually bringing something small, a new book for Ash, a basket of fresh berries, a carved wooden figure to add to the growing collection that was appearing on Ash's shelves. He never forced interaction, never demanded conversation or affection. He would simply be present, available, showing up. Sometimes Ash would ignore him completely, playing in the stream or chasing butterflies while Theron sat on a nearby bench and watched with quiet longing. Sometimes Ash would approach cautiously, asking a question or showing his father something interesting he'd found, then retreat again. And sometimes, increasingly as the days turned to weeks, Ash would sit beside his father and they would talk. The conversations started small and simple. "What kind of fish are in this stream? Can you teach me to use a real sword, not just a practice one? Did Mother really sneak into the kitchens at night?" But gradually, they deepened. "Tell me about the night I was born. What do you remember about Mother's last day? Why didn't you come for me sooner?" That last question, asked on a morning 3 weeks after our arrival, made Theron flinch like he'd been physically struck. "I didn't know," he said, his voice raw. "I didn't know where you were or what was being done to you. Mordain told me you were safe, being cared for, and I believed him because I trusted him, because he'd served my family my entire life. But," and his voice hardened, "that's not an excuse. I should have checked. I should have insisted on seeing you myself. I was the king, the alpha. No one could have stopped me if I truly wanted to see my son, but I was drowning in grief, and I let that grief make me weak and blind. I failed you, and I'm sorrier than words can express." Ash was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then he said something that surprised us both. "Mama says that people make mistakes sometimes, that what matters isn't the mistake, but what you do after. Are you trying to do better now?" "More than anything," Theron said fervently. "Every single day, I'm trying to be the father you deserve, trying to make up for lost time, trying to earn your forgiveness even though I don't deserve it. I know I can't change the past, can't undo what happened to you, but I can try to give you a better future. I can try to make you proud." Ash considered this, his gold eyes thoughtful. "Okay," he said finally. "Then I'll try too, to trust you." It won't be fast and I might not always be good at it, but I'll try." The relief and joy on Theron's face was profound, transformative. "Thank you," he whispered. "That's all I can ask for." The real breakthrough came during a moment I wasn't even present for. I'd been summoned by a healer to discuss some lingering concerns about the scars on Ash's wrists and ankles from the silver chains. While I was gone, Ash and Theron were in the garden with Marcus standing discreet watch. Ash had been practicing with his wooden practice sword, working through forms Theron had taught him, when he suddenly stopped and looked at his father. "Would you," he hesitated, his voice uncertain, "would you teach me how to fight? Really fight, like you do?" Theron had been carefully keeping his physical dominance in check around Ash, never sparring or training in front of him, worried that displays of violence might trigger bad memories. But now he looked at his son and saw not fear, but interest, curiosity, a desire to connect through action rather than words. "Are you sure?" he asked carefully. "Fighting can be intense, physical. If it makes you uncomfortable at any point, we stop immediately. No questions asked." Ash nodded firmly. "I want to learn. I want to be strong like you and Mama. She's the strongest person I know, but she's strong in quiet ways. I want to learn the loud ways, too." So they began. Theron started with the absolute basics: proper stance, weight distribution, how to hold and move with a practice sword. He was patient, encouraging, offering corrections gently, praising effort rather than perfection. And slowly, as they moved through the forms together, something magical happened. They found a language they both understood. Where words had been awkward and loaded with history and pain, physical movement was simple, clear, honest. Block, strike, parry, lunge. Father teaching son, alpha training heir, but more than that, two people connecting through shared action. When I returned from the healer an hour later, I found them both sweaty and laughing, Theron showing Ash a tricky disarming technique while Marcus watched with an approving smile. "Mama, look," Ash called when he saw me, his face flushed with excitement and exertion. "Father taught me how to knock the sword out of someone's hand. Watch," he demonstrated, his movements clumsy but enthusiastic, and Theron's pride was written across his face in letters 10 feet tall. "That's wonderful, baby," I said, my heart squeezing at the casual way he'd said, "Father," the word slipping out naturally rather than carefully considered. "You're getting so strong." He beamed and immediately demanded to show me 3 more techniques, his usual wariness replaced by pure joy. That night, after Ash had fallen asleep on our floor nest, we'd never moved back to the bed, both of us finding comfort in our makeshift arrangement. Theron came to our rooms. He stood in the doorway, looking uncomfortable, uncertain. "May I come in? Just for a moment?" I nodded, curious, and he entered, closing the door softly behind him. He looked down at Ash's sleeping form, and his expression was so tender, so full of love and wonder that it made my breath catch. "He called me father today," he said softly. "Did you hear it?" Several times, just slipped out naturally, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I never imagined he'd get there so quickly. I thought it would take years if it happened at all. "You've been showing up," I said simply. "Every day, consistently, proving you're trustworthy. That matters to him. Children are remarkably forgiving if you give them reason to trust." Theron shook his head in wonder. "He's incredible, Kira. He's smart and brave and so full of potential. When I watch him move, see the way he thinks, the questions he asks, I see echoes of Lyanna and myself, but also something entirely his own. Something shaped by you and the life you gave him." He looked at me directly. "You raised him to be confident, curious, loving, despite every reason not to be. That's all you. That's your strength reflected in him. I'm just starting to get to know my own son, and I'm in awe of him, of what he survived, who he's become. And I'm in awe of you for making that possible." I felt heat rise in my cheeks at the intensity of his gaze, the sincerity in his voice. "I just did what any mother would do," I deflected. "No," he said firmly, stepping closer. "You did what a truly exceptional person would do. And I need you to know that I see that I value it, He stopped, seeming to struggle with words, "that I'm grateful every day that my son had you when he didn't have me. You're not just his mother, Kira. You're his hero. And you're mine too." The weight of those words hung in the air between us, charged with meaning I wasn't quite ready to examine. "I should let you sleep," he said, backing toward the door. "But thank you. For everything. For being patient with me. For helping me build a relationship with my son. He paused, for being you." Then he was gone, leaving me standing in the quiet room, my heart beating faster than it should, my thoughts in turmoil. The days continued to pass, settling into a rhythm that felt increasingly natural. Ash thrived in ways I hadn't anticipated. He was still a wild child at heart, still needed his time in the forest and his morning runs in wolf form, but he was also blooming in the structured environment of the fortress. He loved the library, spending hours poring over books about history, geography, wolf lore, anything that caught his interest. He loved the training yard, where Theron and Marcus and eventually other warriors taught him combat skills, strategy, pack dynamics. He even developed a cautious friendship with some of the younger wolves, children of pack members who were brave enough to approach the mysterious prince. But dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the reckoning I'd been half expecting finally arrived. It was 6 weeks after our return when Theron made his move against Mordain. He'd spent the time carefully gathering evidence, interviewing servants and guards who'd been too afraid to speak before, uncovering a conspiracy that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. Mordain hadn't just poisoned the queen and tortured the prince. He'd been systematically embezzling from the pack treasury, accepting bribes from rival alphas in exchange for information, and planning a coup that would have placed him as regent ruling through a puppet king. The trial was held in the Great Hall, with all the pack's alphas and high-ranking members present. Ash and I watched from a private balcony, hidden from the crowd's view but able to see and hear everything. It was important, Theron had said, for Ash to witness justice being done, to see that the man who had hurt him would be held accountable. Mordain was dragged in chains before the throne, and the evidence was presented methodically, devastatingly. Witness after witness came forward, their testimonies painting a picture of a man who had betrayed his king, his pack, and every principle of honor. When it was over, when the guilt had been established beyond any doubt, Theron rose from his throne. His voice rang through the hall, cold and final. Mordain of House Greystone, you are found guilty of high treason, murder, conspiracy, and crimes against the crown and the heir. Your titles are stripped, your lands are forfeit, your name will be stricken from pack records, and you are sentenced to exile beyond the territories, forbidden from ever returning on pain of death. It was the harshest sentence short of execution, and from the gasps in the crowd, far more merciful than many expected. Mordain had clearly anticipated death, and the confusion on his face was almost comical. Why? He finally spat. Why exile instead of execution? I deserve death for what I've done. Because, Theron said, his voice ringing with conviction, my son asked me not to kill you. He looked up at where we sat, and the entire hall followed his gaze to see Ash standing at the balcony rail, small but brave, his gold eyes steady. Despite everything you did to him, despite the torture and pain and trauma you caused, he doesn't want your death on his conscience. He wants you to live with what you've done, to spend every day knowing that you failed, that your grand plans came to nothing, that the child you tried to destroy is now the crown prince and will one day be king. That is a far crueler punishment than a quick death, and it is a testament to my son's character that he would show such mercy. Mordain looked up at Ash, and for the first time, something like shame crossed his features. Then he was dragged away, to be escorted to the border and cast out forever. The hall erupted in discussion, wolves talking over each other, debating the sentence, the evidence, the implications. But I only had eyes for Ash, who was trembling beside me. Was that the right thing? He asked quietly. Mama, was I wrong? Should I have let father execute him? He hurt so many people. Oh, baby. I pulled him into a tight hug. There's no right or wrong answer to that question. Some people would say he deserved death. Some would say exile is better. You made the choice that felt right to you, that let you sleep at night, and that's all anyone can ever do. You chose mercy over vengeance, and that's a brave choice, a strong choice. I'm proud of you. That night, Theron came to our rooms again, and this time Ash was awake to greet him. Thank you, Theron said, kneeling so he was at eye level with his son, for asking me to spare him. You have more compassion in your small heart than most grown wolves will ever possess. You made the harder choice, the braver choice, and you did it knowing some people would judge you for it. That takes real courage. Ash shuffled his feet, uncomfortable with the praise. I just didn't want to be like him, he said quietly. He hurt people because he was angry and wanted power. I don't want to hurt people. I want to be better. You are better, Theron said with absolute conviction. You already are, and you'll only continue to grow into an even better man. I'm honored to be your father. Then something shifted in Ash's expression, and without warning, he stepped forward and wrapped his arms around Theron's neck in a tight hug. It was the first time he'd initiated physical contact, the first time he'd voluntarily sought comfort or connection from his father. Theron froze for a split second, then his arms came up slowly, carefully, to return the embrace. He held his son like Ash was made of spun glass, like he was the most precious thing in the universe, and I saw tears streaming silently down the Alpha King's face. Thank you, he whispered into Ash's hair. Thank you for giving me a chance. Thank you for letting me be your father." "Love you," Ash mumbled against his shoulder, the words muffled but clear. "Learning to. Gonna keep trying." "That's all I can ask," Theron said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's everything." From that night forward, things changed again, deepened. Ash started calling Theron father consistently, not just in slips of the tongue, but deliberately, consciously. He started seeking out his father's company, asking to train together, to eat meals together, to just spend time together. And Theron, who had been so careful to maintain distance, to let Ash set the pace, now allowed himself to be more present, more affectionate. He would ruffle Ash's hair when he did well in training. He would listen with genuine interest to Ash's rambling stories about books he'd read or things he'd discovered in the garden. He would carry Ash on his shoulders through the fortress, the two of them laughing, together, drawing smiles from everyone who saw them. And somewhere in all of this, I began to notice Theron looking at me differently. Not just with gratitude or respect, but with something warmer, deeper, more complicated. I would catch him watching me when he thought I wasn't looking, his ice blue eyes soft, his expression contemplative. One evening, about 3 months after our arrival at the fortress, he asked if we could speak privately. Ash was at a reading lesson with a tutor, a kind elderly scholar who had infinite patience for Ash's endless questions, so I agreed. We walked to the battlements, high above the fortress, where the wind whipped our hair and the view stretched for miles, forest and mountains and ski. For a long time, neither of us spoke, just stood side by side looking out at the territories. Then Theron began, his voice quiet but clear despite the wind. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to just listen, not respond immediately. Can you do that for me?" I nodded, curious and a little apprehensive. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the stone parapet until his knuckles turned white. "When Lyanna died," he began, "I thought my capacity for love died with her. I thought that part of me was simply gone, burned away by grief, never to return. I told myself I would rule, would be a good king, would eventually try to be a good father, but that I would never love again. Never open my heart to that kind of vulnerability, that kind of pain. It was safer that way, cleaner, easier to control." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Then I found you in that clearing, standing between me and my son, ready to fight an alpha king and 6 warriors with nothing but your bare hands and your courage. And something in my chest that I thought was dead cracked open. Not much, just a hairline fracture, but it was there." He turned to look at me, and the intensity in his ice blue eyes made my breath catch. "Over these past months, I've watched you with Ash. I've seen your patience, your kindness, your fierce protectiveness. I've seen the way you put his needs before your own, always, without hesitation. I've seen your strength, not the physical kind, but the kind that matters more, the strength of character, of conviction, of unwavering love. And that crack in my heart has been widening." His voice dropped to barely more than a whisper. "I'm falling in love with you, Kira. I think, if I'm honest, I started falling the moment I saw you in the wilderness, covered in dirt and scratches, looking at me like you'd tear my throat out if I threatened your child. But I know I have no right to these feelings. I know you've been through too much, that I've put you through too much. I know you see me as Ash's father, as your king, maybe as a friend if I'm lucky, but probably not as anything more." My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the wind. I opened my mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "Please, let me finish. I'm not telling you this because I expect anything from you. I'm not asking you to return my feelings or to consider any kind of romantic relationship. You've given me more than I ever deserved already. You've given me my son back, given me a chance to be a father. I'm telling you because I believe in honesty and because I can't keep carrying this secret without it poisoning everything between us. You deserve to know the truth, and the truth is that I love you. I love your strength and your compassion. I love the way you make Ash laugh, the way you see the best in people even when they don't deserve it. I love the way you challenged me, pushed back against my authority, refused to be intimidated. I love," he stopped, his voice breaking slightly. "I love who you are, Kira. Every part of you." He took a shaky breath. "But I also want you to know that this doesn't change anything. You're still free to live your life however you choose. If you want to stay here in the fortress as Ash's mother and nothing more, I will support that completely. If you want your own residence separate from the royal wing, I'll arrange it. If you want to return to the forest, I'll let you go, though it would break my heart. If you want to find a mate of your own choosing, someone better than me, someone who didn't fail so catastrophically, I'll give you my blessing and my protection. Your happiness matters more to me than my feelings. Ash needs you, and I won't do anything that might drive you away from him. From us." The wind howled around us, and I stood there trying to process everything he'd just said. This powerful alpha king, feared throughout the territories, had just laid his heart bare before me, made himself completely vulnerable, and done it while explicitly telling me I owed him nothing in return. It was possibly the bravest thing I'd ever witnessed. "Theron," I finally said, and he flinched slightly as if preparing for rejection. "You said to listen and not respond immediately, but I think I need to respond now, before this sits between us like a weight." He nodded tightly, his jaw clenched, his entire body radiating tension. "When I took Ash," I continued slowly, trying to find the right words, "I gave up on the idea of ever having a mate. I thought my life would be spent in the wilderness, hidden, alone, except for him. I thought I would grow old in that cave, and when I eventually died, Ash would be the one to mourn me. I made peace with that. It seemed like a fair trade, my chance at a normal life in exchange for his survival. I had no regrets." I looked at him directly, holding his gaze. "But these past months have changed things. I've watched you transform from a distant, broken king into a devoted father. I've seen your patience, your dedication, your willingness to admit mistakes and learn from them. I've seen the way you look at Ash, like he's your entire world, like you'd move mountains for him. And I've seen the way you look at me, with respect and gratitude, and yes, with love. I've felt it every time you brought us gifts, every time you showed up in the garden, every time you asked my opinion, or sought my guidance, or simply sat with us in comfortable silence." His eyes widened, hope beginning to dawn in their depths. "I'm not the same person I was in the forest," I said softly. "I've been changing too, growing, becoming someone who might be able to imagine a different future. A future that includes more than just survival. A future that might include," I paused, gathering my courage, "that might include love. Not the desperate, clinging love of two people trying to fill a void, but the strong, healthy love of equals who choose each other, who see each other's flaws and strengths and value both." I took a step closer to him. "I'm not ready to jump into anything immediately. I need time to process, to be sure of my own feelings, to make certain this is what I want and not just what's convenient or expected. But I want you to know that I'm not rejecting you. I'm not saying no. I'm saying maybe, and asking if you're patient enough to wait while I figure out my heart." A sound escaped him, half laugh, half sob, and suddenly I was in his arms. He pulled me close, his face buried in my hair, his large body shaking slightly. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for not shutting the door completely. Thank you for giving me hope." "I'll wait, Kira. I'll wait as long as it takes. A year, 10 years, forever if that's what you need. Just knowing there's a chance is more than I dared dream of." We stood there on the battlements, wrapped in each other's arms, the wind whipping around us, and something inside me settled. Something that had been restless and uncertain found a place of peace. This felt right in a way I hadn't expected, like coming home after a long journey, like finding a missing piece I didn't know I'd been searching for. When we finally separated, his eyes were red-rimmed but clear, his expression open and vulnerable. "We should get back," I said softly. "Ash's lesson will be ending soon, and he'll wonder where we are." Theron nodded, but caught my hand before I could walk away. "Kira, one more thing. Whatever happens between us, whatever you decide, I want you to know that you already have a place here. Not as a servant, not as a guest, but as family. As Ash's mother, yes, but also as someone valuable in your own right. You're intelligent, compassionate, strong. The pack is learning to see that, but I want to make it official. I want to give you a title, a role, authority that comes from you, not from your relationship to Ash or to me. What would you want that to be?" I blinked, surprised by the question. I hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered what my role might be beyond caring for Ash. "I don't know," I admitted. "What options are there?" "You could be an advisor," he suggested. "Your insights about people, about what the pack needs, they're valuable. You see things I miss because I'm too high up, too removed from the daily lives of ordinary wolves. Or you could work with the Omega population, make their lives better, give them opportunities and protections they don't currently have, or something else entirely, whatever calls to you, whatever you're passionate about." "The Omega population," I said immediately, surprising myself with the certainty. I remember what it was like to be invisible, to be discounted, to have no voice or power. If I can change that for others, if I can make even a small difference, that's what I want to do. "Then that's what you'll do," he said with a smile. "Omega Advocate, a new position reporting directly to the throne. You'll have authority to investigate complaints, propose policy changes, allocate resources, real power to make real change. Is that acceptable?" It was more than acceptable. It was perfect. "Yes," I said, feeling a spark of excitement. "Yes, I'd like that very much." "Good," he said with satisfaction. I'll have Marcus draw up the official documents. You'll be announced at the next pack gathering. He hesitated, then added softly, Lyanna would have loved this. She always wanted to do more for the Omegas, but never found the right approach. She'd be so happy to know you're taking up that cause. The mention of his late mate didn't hurt the way I thought it might. Instead, it felt like a blessing, like she was giving her approval to whatever was growing between us. We walked back through the fortress together, not touching but close, existing in a new space between friendship and something more. When we reached our rooms, Ash was waiting, bouncing with excitement. Mama, Father, guess what I learned today? I can read the old language now, the one they used centuries ago. Master Cornelius says I'm his fastest student ever. That's wonderful, baby, I said, pulling him into a hug. You're so smart. Tell us all about it. And as Ash launched into an enthusiastic recounting of his lesson, complete with dramatic gestures and sound effects, I caught Theron's eye over his head. The look that passed between us was warm, hopeful, full of possibility. We were building something here, the three of us. A family that had been broken and scattered was slowly, carefully, coming back together in a new configuration. Not replacing what had been lost, but creating something different, something that honored the past while reaching toward the future. The months continued to pass, and our family dynamic settled into something beautiful and strong. Ash continued to thrive, growing in confidence and skill. He was learning to navigate pack politics, studying strategy and diplomacy alongside combat and wolf lore. He was making friends, real friendships with other young wolves who saw past the stories to the person underneath. He was learning to balance his wild nature with his royal responsibilities, to be both the feral child of the forest and the crown prince. And most importantly, he was happy, genuinely, deeply happy in a way that made my heart sing every time I saw his smile. My work as Omega advocate consumed me in the best possible way. I discovered that the Omega population had far more grievances than I'd realized, years of accumulated injustices and overlooked needs. I started small, improving living conditions in the servant quarters, establishing fair wage standards, creating channels for Omegas to report abuse without fear of retaliation. But gradually, with Theron's full support, I pushed for larger changes: education opportunities for Omega children, job training programs, representation in pack councils. It was slow, frustrating work, pushing against centuries of tradition and hierarchy. But every small victory, every Omega who came to thank me with tears in their eyes, every life I helped improve, it fueled my determination to do more. And Theron, he became my partner in every sense except the romantic one, though even that line was blurring over time. We would spend hours in his study discussing pack business, debating policy, challenging each other's ideas. He valued my input, genuinely listened when I spoke, changed his mind when I made good arguments. He introduced me to visiting alphas as his advisor, giving me legitimacy and authority. He stood beside me when I faced resistance from traditionalists who thought an Omega had no business having power. He was my strongest advocate, my fiercest defender, my closest friend. And somewhere in all of that work, all those conversations, all those moments of standing side by side facing challenges together, I fell in love with him. Not suddenly, not dramatically, but gradually. Like the sun rising so slowly you don't notice until suddenly it's day and you can't remember what darkness looked like. I fell in love with his dedication to his people, the way he carried the weight of leadership with such seriousness. I fell in love with his dry sense of humor that appeared in private moments, making me laugh when I least expected it. I fell in love with his hands, scarred and strong, equally capable of wielding a sword or gently braiding our son's hair. I fell in love with his voice, the way it could command an army or whisper bedtime stories. I fell in love with his integrity, his willingness to admit mistakes, his constant striving to be better. It was 6 months after his confession on the battlements when I finally knew with absolute certainty. We were in the garden, the three of us, on a warm spring evening. Ash was showing off his latest combat moves, having finally mastered a particularly difficult disarming technique. Theron was watching with unrestrained pride, calling out encouragement and corrections in equal measure. And I was sitting on a bench, watching the two of them, and it hit me like a physical blow. This was my family. This was my home. Not the fortress, not the position or the power or the security, but these two people, these two wolves who had somehow become my entire world, the boy I'd chosen to save and the man I was choosing to love. That's when I knew I was ready. Ready to move forward, ready to take the leap, ready to risk my heart on this impossible, beautiful possibility. That night, after Ash had fallen asleep on our floor nest, I went to Theron's private chambers for the first time. My heart was hammering as I knocked on the heavy wooden door, my palms sweaty, my wolf pacing anxiously inside me. He opened the door, dressed casually in simple sleeping clothes, his hair damp from a bath. When he saw me, surprise and concern flashed across his face. "Kira? Is everything all right? Is Ash okay?" "Ash is fine," I said quickly. I need to talk to you, about us." His entire body went still, and I saw hope war with caution in his eyes. "Come in," he said, stepping aside to let me enter. His chambers were surprisingly simple for an Alpha King, dominated by a massive bed and a desk overflowing with paperwork, with weapons displayed on the walls and a fire crackling in the hearth. He gestured to chairs by the fire, but I remained standing, too nervous to sit. "I've been thinking," I began, then stopped, frustrated with my own inability to find the right words. "For months I've been thinking about what you said on the battlements, about your feelings, about the possibility of us, and I've been watching you, watching how you are with Ash, with me, with the pack. I've been learning who you really are, not the king or the warrior or the grieving widower, but you, Theron, the man underneath all those roles." He was watching me intently, barely breathing, like he was afraid any movement might shatter this moment. "And?" he prompted softly when I fell silent. "And I've realized something," I said, looking directly into his ice blue eyes. "I love you. Not because you're Ash's father, or because you're the Alpha King, or because it's convenient or expected. I love you because you're honorable and kind and strong. I love you because you listen when I speak, because you value my opinions, because you treat me as an equal even though our ranks are so different. I love you because you're a good father, because you're trying so hard to make up for past mistakes, because you show up every single day even when it's hard. I love you because when I look at you, I don't just see safety or stability. I see partnership. I see someone I want to stand beside, someone I want to build a life with, someone I choose not out of necessity but out of genuine desire." Theron made a choked sound, and suddenly he was moving, crossing the distance between us in 3 long strides. He stopped just short of touching me, his hands hovering near my face like he was afraid I might disappear. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Kira, are you absolutely sure? Because if we do this, if we take this step, I'm not letting go. I don't have the strength to love you and then lose you. So I need to know that you're certain that this isn't gratitude or confusion or anything other than real, genuine feelings." "I'm certain," I said firmly, reaching up to place my hands over his, guiding them to cup my face. "I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you. Not because I owe you or because Ash needs a father, but because I want you. Because I love you, Theron. Because I can't imagine my future without you in it." He kissed me then, and it was nothing like I'd imagined. It wasn't desperate or demanding or claiming. It was tender, reverent, full of so much love and gratitude and relief that it made tears spring to my eyes. His lips were soft against mine, his hands gentle on my face, and I felt the mating bond that had been dormant, waiting, suddenly surge to life between us. Not the forced bond of an arranged mating, but the true bond of chosen mates, souls recognizing each other, wolves calling out in joy. When we finally broke apart, both of us breathless, he rested his forehead against mine. "I love you," he whispered. "I have loved you for so long, carried it like a secret flame, hoping but not daring to believe. You've given me back my son, given me a reason to be a better man, and now you're giving me yourself. I don't deserve you, Kira. But I swear to you I will spend every day of my life trying to earn this gift. You already have," I assured him, "just by being you, just by showing up and trying and loving us. That's all I need, Theron. Your presence, your honesty, your heart. You said you can't imagine losing me, and I feel the same. You and Ash, you are my family. You're my home." We stood there in the firelight, wrapped in each other's arms, and I felt complete in a way I never had before. I'd spent so many years being invisible, being overlooked, being discarded. I'd given up on the idea of being loved for myself rather than for what I could provide. But here, in the arms of the Alpha King, I was seen. I was valued. I was cherished. Not despite being an Omega, but as the complete person I was, strengths and flaws and everything in between. "We're going to have to tell Ash," I said eventually, practical concerns intruding on the moment. "He needs to know before anyone else. How do you think he'll react?" Theron smiled, a real smile that transformed his scarred face into something breathtaking. "I think he's known for months. Children are remarkably perceptive, and our son is smarter than most. I think he's been waiting for us to figure out what he saw clearly from the beginning." The next morning, we sat Ash down in the garden, both of us nervous despite Theron's confidence. Ash looked between us, taking in our joined hands, our nervous expressions, and a huge grin spread across his face. "Finally!" he exclaimed, startling us both. "I've been waiting forever for you two to figure it out. You like each other, it's so obvious. Does this mean Father is going to be your mate? Does this mean we get to be a real family, all of us together?" "You're not upset?" I asked, needing to be sure. "You don't feel like I'm replacing your mother or forgetting about our life in the forest?" Ash shook his head emphatically. Mama, you taught me that families can be born or they can be chosen. We chose each other in the forest, and now we're choosing Father too, and Father is choosing both of us. That's not replacing anything. That's just growing, getting bigger, having more love. Mother, he stumbled slightly over the unfamiliar word. She was Father's first mate, his first love. But she's gone, and I think she'd want him to be happy, want all of us to be happy. He launched himself at both of us, wrapping his arms around us in an enthusiastic group hug. So yes, be mates, get married, let's be a family. Theron looked at me over Ash's head, his eyes suspiciously bright. Our son just gave us his blessing. I think we'd better not disappoint him. I think you're right, I agreed, my own eyes wet with happy tears. The formal mating ceremony was held 2 months later, under the full moon in the same garden where we'd spent so many mornings building our family. It was a beautiful blend of tradition and innovation. The entire pack was invited, from the highest-ranking alphas to the lowest omegas, a statement that this was a pack matter, that we were all equal under the moon goddess. I wore a gown of silver and white, with wildflowers from the thornwood woven into my hair. Theron wore formal black with the royal insignia, but he'd also braided a strand of Ash's hair into his own, a visible symbol that this wasn't just a mating of 2 wolves, but the formal bonding of a family. Ash stood between us during the ceremony, his role acknowledged as essential to our union. When the elder performing the ceremony asked who gave this omega to be mated, Ash spoke up in his clear, confident voice. Nobody gives her. She's choosing this herself, choosing us. But I'm here to say that I want this too, that I love them both, that we're already a family, and this is just making it official. The pack erupted in howls of approval, moved by the young prince's words. Theron and I exchanged vows, traditional words about protection and provision and partnership, but we also added our own promises, personal commitments that spoke to our unique journey. I, Theron, take you, Kira, not as my subject or my servant, but as my equal partner and my chosen mate. I vow to honor your strength, to support your work, to never take you for granted. I vow to be the father our son deserves and the mate you need. I vow to stand beside you in every challenge, to celebrate every victory, to build with you a life in a pack that honors the values we both hold dear. You saved my son when I failed him. You brought me back from darkness. You taught me that love isn't about ownership but about choice, about showing up every day and choosing each other again and again. I choose you, Kira, today and every day for the rest of our lives. I, Kira, take you, Theron, not because you're a king or an alpha, but because you're the man who learned to braid hair and tell bedtime stories, who admitted his mistakes and worked to fix them, who values compassion as much as strength. I vow to challenge you when you need challenging, to support you when you need support, to be your partner in ruling this pack with wisdom and mercy. I vow to love our son fiercely and to love you just as fiercely. You gave me a home when I thought I'd always be wandering. You gave me a voice when I thought I'd always be silent. You gave me a family when I thought I'd always be alone. I choose you, Theron, today and every day, in strength and in weakness, in joy and in sorrow, for as long as the moon shines above us. The marking was done simultaneously, both of us biting gently at the same moment, the bond snapping fully into place with a force that left us both breathless. I felt him flow into me, his strength and his determination and his deep well of love. And I felt myself flow into him, my compassion and my resilience and my fierce protective instincts. We were separate but connected, 2 individuals who had chosen to walk the same path, to build the same future. The pack's howls shook the very stones of the fortress, a celebration that lasted well into the night. But the 3 of us, our little family, we slipped away early. We returned to our rooms in the tower, to the floor nest that we'd never abandoned, and we lay there together. Ash was between us, his small body warm and solid and precious. Theron and I faced each other over his sleeping form, our hands joined, our wolves content in a way they'd never been before. We did it, I whispered. We actually built this, the 3 of us, against all odds. We built a family, we built a home. Best thing I ever did was fail to find you sooner, Theron murmured. And at my confused look, he explained, if I'd found you in those first months or years, I wouldn't have been ready. I was too broken, too angry, too lost in grief. You would have run again, and I would have spent my life chasing you, trying to force something that couldn't be forced. We needed the time apart, the time for me to start healing, for you to raise Ash and build his confidence. We needed to come together when we were ready, when we could choose each other freely. The moon goddess has her own timeline, and she knew what we needed even when we didn't. I never thought I'd hear an alpha king credit the goddess with relationship timing, I teased gently. I never thought I'd be an alpha king in love with an omega who regularly argues with me in council meetings and wins, he countered with a smile. We're full of surprises. Our life together unfolded in ways both expected and surprising. As Luna Queen, I continued my advocacy work, pushing for reforms that slowly but steadily improved life for Omegas throughout the pack, and, eventually, throughout all the territories under Theron's influence. My voice carried weight now, not just because I was the king's mate, but because I'd earned respect through my work, through my dedication, through my refusal to back down from important battles. Other alphas started consulting me, seeking my advice on how to better integrate their Omega populations, how to tap into talents and abilities that had been overlooked for generations. Theron ruled with strength tempered by compassion, and together we transformed the Shadowpine Pack into something new, a place where hierarchy still existed but where every wolf had value, where power came with responsibility, where the strong protected the weak, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. It wasn't perfect. We faced resistance and setbacks and moments of frustration. But it was better, measurably, observably better, and that was enough to keep us pushing forward. Ash grew into a remarkable young man, tall and strong like his father, with his mother's golden hair darkening to match the black of his wolf. His eyes remained that striking gold, a mark of his unique heritage and powerful wolf. He mastered the balance between his wild nature and his royal responsibilities, becoming known throughout the territories as the feral prince who could disappear into the wilderness for weeks and return with insights and alliances that benefited the pack. He was beloved by his people, respected by other alphas, feared by those who might threaten what he protected. On his 18th birthday, we held a massive celebration. The entire pack gathered to honor their crown prince and future king, but the moment I treasured most came late in the evening, when the three of us slipped away to our old tower rooms, to the floor nest that we still sometimes used when we needed to feel grounded, connected to our origins. Ash sat between Theron and me, just like he had as a child, though now his legs were too long and he had to fold them awkwardly. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice serious, "about everything that's happened, about how we became a family. And I wanted to say thank you, to both of you, for choosing me, for fighting for me, for loving me even when the world said I wasn't worth it." "Ash," I started, but he shook his head. "No, Mama, let me finish. He looked at me with those gold eyes that still held echoes of the terrified baby I'd found in a dungeon. "You gave up everything for me. Your safety, your chance at a normal life, years of your existence. You lived in a cave and hunted for food and protected me from everything, including my own fears. You taught me that I was worthy of love, that my wolf wasn't a monster, that I could be whoever I wanted to be. You saved my life in every possible way. And Father," he turned to Theron, "you learned from your mistakes. You didn't make excuses or hide from your failures. You admitted you were wrong, and you worked every single day to be better, to be the dad I needed. You taught me about honor and duty and leadership. You showed me that strength isn't just about power, it's about knowing when to be gentle, when to listen, when to change. Both of you taught me what family really means. It's not about blood, though we share that too now. It's about choice and commitment and showing up even when it's hard. It's about loving someone enough to let them be themselves, even when their true self is a little bit wild and doesn't quite fit anywhere. You both did that for me, and his voice cracked slightly, I'm so grateful. I'm so lucky. I got the best parents anyone could ask for, even if it took a while for us all to find each other." Theron and I were both crying openly now, and we pulled him into a tight embrace, this young man who had been a broken baby, a feral child, a tentative prince, and was now becoming the king he was always meant to be. "You saved us too," I whispered. "Both of us. You gave us purpose and hope and a reason to be better than we were. You're not lucky to have us, baby. We're lucky to have you." The years continued to pass, measured in heartbeats and shared meals and quiet moments of connection. Ash eventually took a mate of his own, a fierce warrior woman named Sarah, who could match his wildness and wasn't intimidated by his royal status or his unusual upbringing. We welcomed her into our family with open arms, and I watched with pride as my son built his own partnership based on the foundations Theron and I had laid, choosing love over convenience, respect over submission, partnership over dominance. When Ash and Sarah's first child was born, a daughter with her father's gold eyes and her mother's copper hair, I held her in my arms and felt the circle complete. This tiny princess would grow up knowing she was loved, knowing she had value, knowing her worth came from who she was rather than her rank. She would never know chains or darkness or fear. She would know only the warmth of family, the security of pack, the freedom to become whoever she wanted to be. This, I thought, looking around at the family I'd helped create, the mate I'd chosen, the son I'd raised, the granddaughter I'd just met, this is what I stole a prince for. Not for kingdoms or power or glory, but for this. For love, for family, for the chance to break cycles and build something better. Theron came to stand beside me, his arm wrapping around my waist, and together we looked down at our granddaughter. She's perfect. he murmured. Just like her father was. Just like all of this is. Thank you, Kira. Thank you for not giving up on a broken king and a cursed prince. Thank you for seeing what we could become and having the courage to fight for it. I leaned into his warmth, into the solid strength of the mate I'd chosen and who had chosen me. Thank you for being worth fighting for, I replied. Both of you. My whole life I was told I was nobody, nothing, invisible and insignificant. But you saw me, you valued me, you loved me, and together we built something magnificent. The castle bells began to ring, announcing the new princess to the pack, and the howls of celebration rose to meet them. But in our quiet room, surrounded by family, I felt at peace. The servant who had stolen a prince, the Omega who had become a queen, the invisible girl who had found her voice and her strength in her family. This was my story. This was my legacy. And it was more beautiful than anything I could have imagined in that dark dungeon 5 years ago when I'd made the choice that changed everything. We were proof that families can be built, not just born. That love can heal even the deepest wounds. That strength comes in many forms, and the greatest strength is the courage to choose compassion, to show up, to keep trying, even when everything seems impossible. We were the feral prince, the broken king, and the invisible Omega who refused to stay invisible. And together we became something greater than the sum of our parts. We became home.